Chapter 191, Ingvilt. Shulba Beelzebub did not stand there frozen. He immediately raised his hand and cast a killing curse at Lynn. Lynn raised an eyebrow. Sensing the powerful curse energy contained within the attack, he didn't bother to dodge. Instead, he allowed it to hit him directly. Shulba's eyes lit up with excitement. Success! But 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds passed. Shulba's expression stiffened. Why is it not working? Lynn calmly brushed the dust off his clothes, completely unfazed. Curse immunity was not something to be underestimated. Shulba quickly realized he had fallen into a trap. Meanwhile, Cruisery Asmodeus was growing weaker by the second. Even with the power of the off-eye snake released, he still looked like a helpless child in front of Lynn. There was simply no room to fight back. Damn it! Unwilling to give up, Shulba roared and waved his hand again. Buzz! A swarm of insects filled the air, flapping their wings as they surged toward Lynn. Swallow him whole! Shulba bellowed, his face contorted with rage as he directed the swarm. Lynn cast a casual glance toward the incoming insects. Fwoosh! In the next moment, flames erupted, engulfing the sky. A rainbow-colored blaze, mixed with sparks, demonic fire, karmic fire, and other energies, swept toward the swarm. Hiss! The swarm let out a series of pitiful screeches as they were consumed by the fire. Shulba clenched his fists tightly. Damn it! Nothing was working. Lynn remained expressionless as he withdrew the flames with a flick of his wrist. At the same time, Cruisery Asmodeus, still held firmly in Lynn's grasp, completely vanished. Shulba's heart sank. With Cruisery gone, their already dire situation became even worse. Even Cruisery, empowered by the off-eye snake, couldn't put up a fight. Kateria! Shulba called out sharply, his voice grim. Are you just going to stand there and watch? Kateria blinked, then immediately raised her bloodied hand and smiled awkwardly. Sorry, there's really nothing I can do. Shulba's eyelids twitched violently. It was obvious Kateria was stalling, completely unwilling to get involved. Was she, scared stiff? But with the situation falling apart, it was clear that everything now rested on him alone. Shulba felt increasingly uneasy. The way Cruisery had gone down made it hard for him to maintain confidence, even with the snake's power. His gaze swept over the remaining old Mu faction members, then he quietly sighed. Useless. Completely hopeless. He had already begun considering retreat. Subtly, Shulba moved his fingers, preparing to cast space magic. Lynn, watching him, vanished in a flash. Shulba's pupils shrank in horror. He couldn't see him. How is this the speed of a Mu? No longer hesitating, Shulba hastily activated his teleportation magic. But his speed could not match Lynn's. Bang! A punch infused with flames and anti-devil properties slammed straight into Shulba's body. In that moment, his eyes widened in terror, as if overlapping with the memory of his grandfather's death from 500 years ago. Boom! In an instant, an entire section of the old Mu faction's stronghold, along with Shulba himself, was obliterated. Gulp! Kateria, witnessing the scene before her, couldn't stop herself from swallowing hard. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Neither Cruisery Asmodeus nor Shulba Beelzebub could last even a few moves against Lynn. So then, whose brilliant idea was it to make Valifor their target? Kateria's body trembled. She began to seriously worry about her own fate. After all, she was the one who brought Lynn here. Would she still be able to live? Kateria's mind raced. Her instincts screaming at her to think of a way to survive. Suddenly, an idea sparked. She quickly spoke up, her tone respectful. Lord Lynn. Lynn turned toward her with a slight smile. Calling him Lord now? Quite the quick change of attitude. Kateria smiled nervously, then said, Lord Lynn, there's someone in the old Mu faction I wonder if you might be interested in. Oh. Lynn raised an eyebrow. Kateria didn't dare keep anything hidden. She immediately revealed the name. Ingvilt Leviathan. The moment she said it, Lynn's eyes narrowed. That name. He remembered it. The wielder of the Longinus class sacred gear, Nereid Kyria. Take me to her. Yes, right away. Kateria's heart finally settled a little. Good. At least he's interested. Quickly, she led Lynn deeper into the old Mu faction's headquarters, toward a more secluded area. Before long, Lady Leviathan. The stationed guards saluted Kateria as they passed but stared warily at Lynn. Kateria waved dismissively. This is Lord Lynn. Show some respect. The guards exchanged glances but didn't dare say more. They lowered their heads obediently. A short while later, Kateria guided Lynn into the depths of the stronghold. There, in an ice coffin, lay a sleeping girl with long, flowing purple hair. Even lying down, her figure was eye-catching tall and elegant. Lynn narrowed his eyes. As expected of the Leviathan bloodline. Kateria gestured, putting on a smile like a hostess showing off her best product. Lord Lin, this is Leviathan. She has been asleep for over 100 years due to demonic sleeping sickness. Kateria watched carefully, hoping Lin would show interest. If he wanted Ingvild, maybe, just maybe, she would be spared as a fellow Leviathan. Lin stroked his chin, his gaze fixed on the sleeping girl. How long until she wakes? Kateria froze, then replied with uncertainty, it should be soon, right? Though in truth, she wasn't sure at all. Lin gave her a glance, easily seeing through the lie. But he had no intention of waiting. Open the coffin. Yes. Kateria wiped the sweat from her brow and carefully opened the ice coffin. Lin stepped forward. He reached out and gently traced his slender fingers along Ingvild's delicate body. Then, rib. The fabric of her clothing tore apart in an instant. Kateria's lips twitched. Is he? But Lin said nothing. Instead, he gathered magic energy into his palm. A large evil piece slowly condensed in his hand. Kateria stared at the evil piece in Lin's hand, and a flash of realization appeared in her eyes. Is he planning to take Ingvild as his peerage member? Could it be? Kateria glanced at the sleeping Ingvild with a strange expression. There's no point in making a sleeping beauty like this your wife, right? Well, that's not entirely true either. Sleeping Beauty still has the value of being Sleeping Beauty. Besides, Ingvild has an exquisite appearance and wields a weapon that seems like a gift from the gods. At the same time, without hesitation, Lin directly pressed the evil piece into Ingvild Leviathan's body. Buzz! A flash of light passed through. Ding! You have obtained the peerage member, Ingvild Leviathan. Ding! Your peerage member, Ingvild Leviathan, has been reincarnated as a special devil. At the same moment, a surge of power fed back from Ingvild Leviathan into Lin's body. Lin ignored the system prompt for now, simply staring at Ingvild Leviathan's beautiful form. After a moment, the light faded, and the blessing information of Ingvild Leviathan appeared before his eyes. Ingvild Leviathan. Rank, Ultimate Class Devil. Class, Bishop. Race, Devil. Owner, Lynn Valifor. Stats. Strength, I0. Agility, I0. Endurance, I0. Magic, I0. Class Skills. Magic Enhancement. Sacred Gear. Nereid Kyrie, Poem of Endless Green Sea. Controls dragons through chanting, includes weakening and strengthening effects. Domination over the oceans. Innate abilities. Title Devil. Deep Sea Resonance, when in water, all abilities increase by 50%, and magic recovery speed doubles. Can sense the flow of all water veins and predict the trajectory of enemy water-based attacks. Air of Chaos, when health drops below 30%, summons Leviathan's shadow. Releases a wide-range mental disruption, inflicting fear and confusion. Absorbs enemy magic power and converts it into vitality. Devil Transformation, Aria of the Tides manipulates liquid substances like water, blood, and venom through singing. Can shape these into weapons or barriers. Holds absolute dominion over marine life, including mythical creatures such as the Kraken. Developmental abilities. Magic, S. Summon, S. Ultimate Class Devil. Lin raised an eyebrow. If he remembered correctly, Ingvild Leviathan was supposed to be a half-blood devil. And she had been asleep for over 100 years. He hadn't expected her to possess such overwhelming power. Lin pondered for a moment, then lowered his gaze. Sacred Gear. His eyes narrowed slightly. It seems there have been new developments. The god-slaying weapon Ingvild Leviathan wields was recognized in her blessing data. More importantly, the reason Ingvild possesses the strength of an ultimate class devil is likely because of this sacred gear. Lin had a vague suspicion. After all, it is a divine destroyer. He shifted his attention to the ability Nereid Kyrie, Poem of Endless Green Sea. One aspect controls dragons, while the other commands the oceans. Both are formidable powers. Combined with her title devil skill, she is yet another valuable addition. And then... Ding! You have acquired the title concept. Lin's brow lifted again. Within the space of the evil piece, aside from the sun and the concept of gravity, there now existed the concept of tides. Lin touched his chin thoughtfully as he entered the evil piece space to investigate. He noticed a peculiar attraction between each constellation and every evil piece, causing tidal fluctuations from time to time. So this is the tide. Lin stroked his chin and murmured, this place is really starting to resemble a complete universe. Suddenly, the purple-haired girl lying in the ice coffin let out a soft moan, pulling Lin's attention away from the evil piece space. Ingvild Leviathan slowly opened her eyes, confusion flickering within them. Then, Lin's face came into focus. You're awake, he said calmly. The procedure was successful. Ingvild Leviathan. She looked dazed for a moment. Procedure? What procedure? But she did feel a little cool. Ingvild lowered her gaze and immediately froze. No, no clothes. Ah! Ingvild Leviathan snapped awake, screaming as she curled her body up tightly. She glanced timidly at Lynn, her blush faint but fierce, wrapping herself even more tightly. Ingvild, you're finally awake. Kateria stepped forward, though her gaze couldn't help but drift toward the marking engraved on Ingvild's body. What is that? She couldn't understand the writing. But could this be some sort of reincarnation ceremony? Kateria was curious. Hearing the familiar voice, Ingvild slowly raised her head, surprised. Kateria. She quickly asked, how long have I been asleep? Kateria shrugged casually. Over 100 years, give or take. Ingvild froze, a complicated emotion flashing across her eyes. So, just from a nap, I went from a 17-year-old girl to a 100-year-old grandma. And that wasn't even the worst of it. More than 100 years had passed. Her family members were probably. Ingvild's eyes filled with sorrow. She was a half-human, half-devil hybrid who had once lived among humans. It was only because of her devil sleeping disease that she had followed Kateria here. And in the end, she had slept for more than a century. Smack. Kateria smacked her on the head, frowning. Hey, I'm older than you. Ow! Ingvild yelped, rubbing her forehead instinctively, but then turned toward Lynn, cautiously presenting herself. As she sensed Lynn's gaze, she froze, then quickly covered her chest and other vital areas. Turning her head stiffly, she whispered, Kateria, this is... Kateria looked at her strangely. Your master. Master. Ingvild's head snapped up, eyes wide, heart pounding wildly as she stared at Lynn. Kateria continued, your devil sleeping disease was also cured by your master. Otherwise, who knows how long you would have stayed asleep. Ingvild blinked, staring cautiously at Lynn. So, this man was the one who had saved her? Inevitably, Ingvild thought of the story of Sleeping Beauty and the prince who awakened her. Her face flushed red, and she lowered her head shyly, too embarrassed to meet Lynn's eyes. I will repay you. Seeing this, Lynn smiled faintly and gently stroked her thick purple hair. You've already repaid me. Hi. Ingvild blinked, confused. Lynn pointed toward the blessing inscription on her chest. Your body already bears my mark. Ingvild's eyes widened. She lowered her head, staring at the unfamiliar runes etched into her skin. She also recalled the word Kateria had just mentioned. Master. Her heart began to race again. So, does that mean everything about her now belongs to this man? Ingvild felt a strange, indescribable mix of emotions. When she awoke, not only had she aged over 100 years, but she had lost her family and gained a new master. Lynn rubbed her head once again and said lightly, move your hands away. Ingvild snapped back to reality, her eyes wide as she looked down at herself. Move, my hands? But what should I do? Her face instantly turned bright red, her ears burning. But if it's the master's order, and I promised to repay him. Ha! Taking several deep breaths, Ingvild stiffly moved her hands away. Seeing this, Lynn copied down her blessing information. Afterward, Ingvild remained frozen, staring blankly, eyes filled with confusion. Lynn patiently explained the contents of her blessing. I see. Kateria's eyes flickered, muttering under her breath. Isn't this basically a cheat that allows infinite growth? Bang! Kateria's heart raced wildly. She looked at Ingvild, her heart filling with complicated emotions. Ingvild, you're so lucky. I wonder. Is there any chance I could also obtain Lynn's blessing mark? Driven by this thought, Kateria gritted her teeth and without hesitation knelt down before Lynn. Lord Lynn, Kateria is willing to serve you at any cost. Lynn raised an eyebrow, looking down at her with a faint smile. Kateria's body stiffened immediately, tension filling the air. She didn't dare to breathe. Time passed slowly. The space around them grew heavier. Sweat began to bead on Kateria's forehead. Lynn said nothing, but the pressure alone was suffocating. Was he planning to kill her? Just as Kateria was about to lose hope, Lynn finally spoke. All right. Kateria's eyes widened in shock, her body relaxing all at once. With a soft thud, she collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. It wasn't until then that she realized she was drenched in sweat. Kateria looked as if she had survived a disaster. For a moment, she had truly thought she was going to die. Luckily. Thankfully. She raised her head, forcing a smile as she looked up at Lynn. Lynn's expression remained calm. The evil piece responded to Kateria Leviathan, confirming that she indeed possessed the potential to become a peerage member. More importantly, her malevolent power was truly tempting. So far, he had only experienced the feedback from highest-class devils. And now? Lynn lowered his gaze, his voice flat. Take it off. Hearing Lynn's command. Although Kateria felt a bit weak, she still began undressing without any hesitation. After witnessing the entire process of Ingvilt Leviathan's reincarnation ceremony, Kateria had no objections to Lynn's request. In fact, she even added a little flair of her own. Originally, she only needed to expose her upper body, but she deliberately stripped completely. Lynn looked at the dark-skinned woman standing before him and couldn't help but feel that he had been having an unusual streak of affinity with dark-skinned beauties lately. Without delay, he condensed the evil piece and pressed it directly against Kateria Leviathan's chest. MMM. The cold touch made Kateria's body tremble slightly. A strange, indescribable sensation surged through her body, causing her to let out a soft moan. The wounds on her body, which had been corroded by the power of light, began to heal under the effect of the reincarnation ritual. Crack. Faintly, Kateria seemed to hear the sound of something breaking inside her. Suddenly, she felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her body. Her heart began to race, her blood boiling uncontrollably. Kateria's breathing grew rapid. Both her mind and body were overwhelmed with excitement at the same time. The strength that had been stagnant for so long suddenly felt as if its restraints had been removed. As expected, a flash of enlightenment appeared in Kateria's eyes. The blessing had completely shattered the chains that bound her. Clenching her fists tightly, Kateria trembled with excitement. She knew her condition well. 300 years. Her power had been stagnant for 300 long years. Those 300 years had taught her one painful truth. She had limits. Agility, I0. Endurance, I0. Magic, I0. Class skills. Magic enhancement. Innate abilities. Devil's skeleton. All magic attacks carry a chaos corrosion effect, continuously weakening the enemy's defense. When health falls below 50%, magic output increases by 50%. Serpent Contract of Office. Summon the Phantom of the Infinite Dragon. Effects, increases all stats by 30%, casting time reduced to instant. Activates Space Blockade, preventing enemies within range from using teleportation or escape abilities. The end is the same. When HP drops below 10%, triggers a self-destruction ritual. Transforms the body into abyssal tentacles to bind the enemy, releasing a magic annihilation explosion with a radius of 1 kilometer. Explosion damage ignores enemy magic resistance. Success rate of self-sacrifice, 100%. Dash. Lynn stroked his chin, examining Kateria's blessing information. For a Mu-class devil, her innate abilities were a bit on the plain side. The Serpent Contract of Office clearly stemmed from the snake's power within her. The end is the same was likely the self-destruction technique mentioned in the original work. Seeing this skill, Lynn couldn't help but wonder why Kateria hadn't used it against him earlier. Not that it would have worked. Lynn copied down Kateria's blessing details. At the same time, an idea crossed his mind. Accept feedback from Kateria Leviathan. Boom. In an instant. It felt as though an explosion went off inside Lynn's body. Both his magic power and physical strength began to rise rapidly, almost unnaturally. Crack. A sound like shattering glass echoed in his ears. The thick membrane between him and the transcendent level was violently pierced through. At the same time, the level indicator in front of Lynn's eyes changed. The words Satan class faded away, replaced by 3 large characters. Transcendent. Kateria held her blessing inscription in her hands, but her gaze was locked on Lynn. She stared blankly at her master. At that very moment, Lynn's aura had surged upward like a rocket. Although he suppressed the outburst quickly, Kateria was certain she hadn't imagined it. That momentum. It was absolutely beyond the Mu-class. Transcendent? The word echoed in Kateria's mind, but for a moment, she was hesitant to believe it. She had just pledged herself to this man, and he had already become a transcendent? What kind of absurd luck was this? Kateria's emotions were in complete chaos. Her breathing grew heavier. A blessing in disguise? For the first time in her long, unfortunate life, Kateria Leviathan felt the benefits of clinging to someone truly powerful. What on earth is this devil? From this moment forward, she would be the new Leviathan. A faint hope began to rise in Kateria's heart. With Lynn's strength and his natural suppression of other devils, the underworld would surely fall into his hands sooner or later. Perhaps the Leviathan bloodline could shine again. Kateria felt a growing sense of anticipation. But she had just joined Lynn's peerage and had no real status yet. She needed to find a way. Kateria's eyes turned slightly unfocused. Then, after a brief moment of thought, her eyes lit up with a sudden idea. After some time, having fully absorbed the massive boost in strength, Lynn slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Kateria kneeling on the ground, her eyes filled with charm. Lord Lynn, I have offended you before. Now that I have received your blessing, Kateria feels uneasy. Please, bestow upon me your grace. Kateria's intention was crystal clear. As long as she could bear Lynn's child, inheriting the Leviathan bloodline, her position would be secure. Lynn raised an eyebrow, stroking his chin as he looked at Kateria with interest. He hadn't expected her to take this approach. But there was no reason for Lynn to refuse the gift being offered so willingly. He reached out, pulling Kateria into his arms, and pressed her down onto Ingvild Leviathan's ice coffin. Ingvild Leviathan. Tokyo. Sirafal arrives for backup. But late again, Sirafal sighed, feeling helpless. It was the same back in Kua town, and now it's happening again here in Tokyo. Shirin Okariki smiled awkwardly. Sorry, we didn't expect this either. What they thought would be a catastrophic event had been effortlessly resolved by a mysterious powerhouse who suddenly appeared. Even now, Shirana still found it hard to believe. This has nothing to do with you. Sirafal waved her hand casually. After all, it's that Lynn Valifor. Thinking of this, Sirafal clicked her tongue in frustration. She and Surtsks had long suspected that the old Mu faction would target Lynn. But the result was the same as what happened to Cockabile. The key point was that this time, the enemy wasn't someone Cockabile could handle. Not only were there two Satan-class devils among them, but one of them was even a Leviathan bloodline Mu. Even if she had faced these two personally, it wouldn't have been easy to overcome this crisis. TCH. Surtsks even asked her to come and assist Lynn. But honestly, she couldn't figure him out at all. Sirafal was growing more and more suspicious about the Lynn from 500 years ago. Otherwise, how could there be so many coincidences? The problem was, during their last encounter, she hadn't felt that same overwhelming pressure from Lynn that she remembered from 5 centuries ago. That was why she had been hesitant. But now, her suspicions were getting stronger. Still, he really went straight into the old Mu faction's lair? When she heard the news, Sirafal was genuinely surprised. This guy was not only skilled but also ridiculously bold. But if he truly is that Lynn Valifor from back then maybe there's nothing to worry about after all. Sirafal stroked her chin thoughtfully before finally sighing. Well, let's go have a look. They had some guesses about the locations connected to the old Mu faction. If they investigated one by one, they might uncover some clues. Besides, if Lynn was involved, there was bound to be some commotion. With that thought, Sirafal ignored the other members of the Lion King organization and used teleportation magic to return to the underworld. Meanwhile, after Sirafal left, Shirin Okariki fell into deep thought. She kept thinking about the name Sirafal had just mentioned. Lynn Valifor. So, was this the person who had saved Tokyo this time? Lynn. Shirana quietly repeated the name to herself, then suddenly froze. Lynn Group. Her eyes widened sharply. Lynn and the Lynn Group. There was no way that was just a coincidence. Even if someone beat her to death, she wouldn't believe it. Damn it! Shirana suddenly began to panic. Kirasaka Sayaka was still undercover inside the Lynn Group. If Lynn misunderstood their intentions, the Lion King organization would be in serious trouble. Immediately, Shirana called out to. A moment later, Yukari, who had transformed into a black cat, gave her an annoyed look. You really treat me like a convenient tool, huh? Shirana ignored the complaint and quickly explained the situation regarding Lynn and the Lynn Group. After listening, Yukari's expression turned serious. She fully understood the gravity of the situation. Her precious disciple was still in the middle of a covered mission. Realizing this, Yukari could no longer sit still. There was no time to report through formal channels. She hurriedly called Kirasaka Sayaka directly. Kirasaka, your mission is over. Return immediately. Return. Suddenly, an unfamiliar, mature female voice came from the other end of the line. It was clearly not Kirasaka Sayaka's voice. Hearing this, both Shirana and Yukari froze, their hearts tightening. She can't come back. The voice was followed by faint sobbing. You. Beep, beep, beep. The call disconnected. Shirana. Yukari. What exactly was happening on the other end of the line? Yukari's heart trembled as disturbing thoughts crossed her mind, reminding her of certain secret investigator stories. Kirasaka. I'm so sorry for you. Just imagining the tragic fate that might befall Kirasaka Sayaka, Yukari's eyes began to tear up. Why did someone like Kirasaka, who was terrified of men, have to suffer something like this? Shirana remained silent for a while before reaching out and patting Yukari on the shoulder, speaking with regret. My condolences. She could only pray that Kirasaka wouldn't expose the Lion King organization. But could that really be avoided? Shirana's expression turned grim. She knew they had to find a way to eliminate this potential threat. A look of determination flashed across Shirana's eyes. In the underworld, at the stronghold of the old Mu faction, Sirafal quietly approached the area where the commotion had been reported. But the place was already eerily desolate. Sirafal. So quiet. Could it be? The old Mu faction has already been wiped out? Suddenly, a faint but peculiar sound reached her ears. Seraphal's expression hardened as she focused and pricked up her ears to listen. Pa, pa, pa. Seraphal. There's still fighting. She immediately flew toward the source of the sound. Meanwhile, inside the chamber where Ingvild Leviathan slept, Lynn raised an eyebrow, sensing something. Is there a curious little cat sneaking around outside? He thought about it briefly, but then decided to let it go. Consider it a free show. A little gift for the intruder. Outside. Seraphal crept closer cautiously, her expression serious. But the closer she got, the stranger her expression became. Why? Why did it sound like more than just the sound of combat? There were, very clear, high-pitched noises mixed in. Seraphal peeked around the corner quietly. In the next instant, she froze in place. Smack, smack, smack. Gulp. Seraphal swallowed hard, her mind going blank. If she remembered correctly, wasn't the one inside that ice coffin supposed to be the Leviathan of the old Mo-faction? Why was this happening? Seraphal squeezed her thighs together, her head spinning. Her breathing became shaky. She continued eavesdropping for a moment before finally clenching her legs tightly and fleeing in a flustered panic. The next day, Ingvild Leviathan stared at the pale white marks left on Kateria Leviathan's brown skin, her face still flushed bright red. She pressed her thighs together, fidgeting slightly. She could clearly feel the stickiness between them. Ha, Ingvild couldn't help but let out a soft moan, her heart racing uncontrollably. Ever since waking up, she had been hit by one shocking event after another. First, she'd gained a master. Then came the blessing system and everything else that followed. And finally, Ingvild bit her lip, her emotions in turmoil. It felt like her once pure soul had been thoroughly stained. Smack! Suddenly, the sound of a crisp slap echoed through the air. Ingvild immediately shrank back like a startled kitten, the events of the previous day flashing through her mind. Lynn gave Kateria Leviathan's backside a firm slap, causing a stream of water to flow out instantly. Humph! Kateria let out a soft snort, then slowly opened her hazy eyes and looked at Lynn, dazed. Don't just lie there. Time to get up. Back in Tokyo, Lynn once again stepped through the gates of Shuchen Academy. After resting for the night, the academy looked as if it had never been attacked. Everything appeared peaceful. But the frequent glances cast toward Lynn revealed an unusual tension in the air. Emotions like fear, dread, awe, worship, admiration, and even love were all mixed together. Lynn remained calm, ignoring these gazes as he walked straight toward Natsuki Minamiya's office. When she saw him, Natsuki gave him an annoyed glare. So you finally remembered to come back. There had been no word from him all night. She had been seriously worried that something might have gone wrong. After all, that was the lair of the old Mo-faction. Natsuki had spent the entire night in anxious worry. Her phone was nearly broken from how many times she tried to reach him. She had even considered heading there herself to check on him. But she realized she didn't even know the exact location of the old Mo-faction's base. Lynn simply shrugged without saying anything. He couldn't exactly tell Natsuki that he had spent the entire night entangled with Kateria, could he? Natsuki rolled her eyes at him but eventually sighed. I really didn't expect you to have grown this powerful. She had been genuinely shocked watching him in action yesterday. Especially when he suppressed 2 Satan-class devils so effortlessly. It was almost unbelievable. All of that had unfolded right before her eyes, and she still couldn't comprehend how he had done it. And did you really wipe out the old Mo-faction completely? Natsuki still found it hard to believe, but when she saw Lynn standing there unharmed, she knew the answer. Lynn gave a faint smile, not bothering to respond. The fact that he was here, safe and sound, was all the answer she needed. Stare. In the guidance counselor's office, Natsuki Minamiya silently stared at the man sitting before her, both familiar and unfamiliar. Are you really still Lynn? Natsuki looked a bit dazed. She had been in contact with Lynn for many years and had never noticed anything unusual about him. Lynn shrugged casually. I'm the real deal. Natsuki fell into deep thought, her mind replaying every interaction she had ever had with Lynn. When had it all started? After a while, Natsuki stood there in a trance. The Supernatural Investigation Club. The constant stream of girls asking for leave. The rumors about the harem. It all seemed to trace back to when Lynn began gathering his peerage. As she snapped back to reality, Natsuki stared at Lynn with a complicated expression. This guy? Could it be that the more girls he has, the stronger his power becomes? Or worse, the more he does it, the stronger he gets? Even someone as composed as Natsuki found her cheeks flushing at the thought. But the more she thought about it, the more convinced she became. Opening her folding fan with a rustling sound, Natsuki covered her blushing face and said softly, lustful devil. Hi. Lynn looked at her, clearly confused. Natsuki quickly averted her eyes, as if afraid that something bad would happen if she kept looking at him. Lynn didn't mind. Instead, he picked up the black tea Natsuki had brewed, took a sip, and smiled. Your tea-making skills are getting better, Natsuki-chan. Don't push your luck. Natsuki muttered under her breath, though her tone had clearly softened. Lynn chuckled, then leaned back. So, Natsuki-chan, are you still not considering joining my peerage? I could really use a secretary to serve tea, you know. Rias had a keno making tea for her. Would it really be too much for him to expect Natsuki to do the same? Natsuki's eyelids twitched. Her? Serve tea for Lynn? Natsuki rolled her eyes in annoyance. If anything, she wanted a cute maid to serve her. No thanks. But Lynn continued, ignoring her rejection. Besides, your current problem is nothing to me now. Natsuki's body stiffened. You know. Lynn leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk. His tone remained calm. With my current power, do you really think you can hide something like that from me? Natsuki fell silent. From the moment Lynn had asked her to reveal her true form yesterday, she had known he had already figured something out. A contract with a devil. Clenching her fists, Natsuki lowered her gaze. Lynn's voice remained steady. Natsuki-chan, you don't really want to rot away in a dark prison forever, do you? Natsuki. She rolled her eyes at him but responded disdainfully, could you stop with that patronizing tone? Lynn raised an eyebrow, flashing a half-smile. Sounds like you know exactly what I mean. Natsuki snorted coldly. I'm at least a mature woman of 26. Mature. Lynn gave her a once-over, then showed an ambiguous expression. Natsuki's face darkened instantly. Lowering the folding fan to cover her chest, she glared at him. My true identity is quite something, you know. Lynn nodded half-heartedly. Sure, sure. If you say so. Natsuki's face twitched. I really want to toss him into jail and blind him with my real form. But if she actually did that, she would be the one in danger. This guy really is a lustful devil. Lynn paid no mind to Natsuki's frustration and continued casually, so, how about my proposal? Natsuki let out a helpless sigh. How persistent was this lustful devil when it came to her? She now fully understood what becoming Lynn's peerage member meant. A harem. Natsuki glared at him. This guy's personality really is the worst. She rolled her eyes again, then quickly changed the subject. You should be worrying about yourself right now. Worry? About me? Lynn looked at her with a face that practically said, are you serious? Well. Natsuki paused, then spoke in a more serious tone. All right, maybe not worry too much, but be aware. In short, what you did this time was a huge deal. You're bound to attract some unwanted attention. And a person who can casually handle two malevolent devils while living in human society is going to get noticed. Natsuki was giving him a warning. Even putting the distant threats aside. Just take the nearby Lion King organization as an example. Only one day had passed, but Natsuki could already sense the growing unrest there. Not to mention the greater threats farther out. She reminded him, don't forget about those humans with the long Inus-type sacred gear. Lynn didn't react much. Cao and the others? At his current level, they hardly seemed worth mentioning. The conversation between the two shifted into light-hearted chatter after that. Lynn didn't bring up the invitation to join his peerage again. In the underworld. Sirafal still seemed dazed. Sertsk looked at her helplessly. So, are you going to tell me what happened? He had already heard that the old Mu faction had been destroyed by Lynn yesterday, and not through Sirafal's report. What he was more curious about was why Sirafal seemed so out of it. Sirafal pursed her lips and shook her head. There was no way she could just blurt out that she'd seen Lynn with her own eyes, and that Kateria Leviathan had been willingly offering herself to him. But, judging by what she'd heard, Kateria definitely hadn't been forced. Thinking about that, Sirafal felt a tightness in her chest. She had always been wary of Lynn's return. But now that he was back and already surrounded by other women, it still stung more than she'd expected. Her thoughts drifted to the engagement that had once been arranged with the Citri family. Originally, that marriage contract had been meant for her. But then Lynn had suddenly vanished. There had been no news of him for so long. Eventually, Sirafal lost interest in the engagement entirely. After she became a Mu, she left the Citri family, effectively cancelling it. Then, the heir of the Citri family was born. Sana. And now, fate had brought the heir of the Valifor family back. But the one engaged to him wasn't her. Not only that, but just yesterday, she had seen Lynn. But she had prepared herself for this possibility. After all, Grafia was already an extremely strong contender. Ugh. Sirafal flopped down onto the table, feeling frustrated. No matter how much she tried to rationalize it, the bitter feeling in her chest remained. But Now that she wasn't Lin's fiancé, what right did she have to say anything? Fiancé, hey. Single life sucks. Suddenly, Sirafal stood up, her eyes shining brightly. Wait. Why didn't I think of this before? Her eyes gleamed with determination. Didn't Sana want to cancel the engagement anyway? Then as the elder sister, shouldn't she take on that responsibility herself? Sana, for your happiness. Your sister is willing to make this noble sacrifice. Fired up by the idea, Sirafal leapt to her feet and immediately used teleportation magic to leave the conference room. Sir, turning to Ajoka Beelzebub, he asked in confusion, what's up with her? Ajoka paused, then replied calmly, women have their days like this. Sir, do devils even have those kinds of days? Ajoka nodded seriously. Meanwhile, back in Kuah town, in the student council room, a teleportation magic circle lit up. Seraphal's figure suddenly appeared in front of Sana. Sister. Sana looked at her, surprised. Sirafal gave a big smile and said cheerfully, Sana. I'm here to help you break off your engagement. Sana. Sister. Sana looked at Sirafal in shock. And? Cancel the engagement? Sana was completely stunned. What does she mean by that? Sirafal ignored Sana's dazed reaction and pounced directly on her, wrapping her hands around Sana's head and rubbing it hard. It's been so long, my lovely Sana. Come on, let me absorb a little of Sana's energy. Finally snapping back to her senses, Sana immediately began to struggle. Sister. Her voice was muffled, but clearly laced with irritation. Hearing the tone in Sana's voice, Sirafal quickly let go, then smiled sweetly as if to flatter her. Sana-chan, I brought you good news this time. Sana took a deep breath, frowned, and asked, cancel the engagement? Sirafal nodded enthusiastically. How is it? Aren't you happy? Happy? Sana's face darkened. Right now, she just wanted to find a way to shut her sister up. Why is it that we can suddenly cancel the engagement? Sana's eyes narrowed. It had clearly been so complicated before. But now, out of nowhere, Sirafal was saying the engagement could be cancelled? She had always. Thinking of something, Sana bit her lip, her eyes filled with frustration and unwillingness. Sirafal didn't catch the shift in Sana's expression and continued proudly, of course, it's all thanks to your wonderful big sister. I just couldn't bear to see my lovely Sana suffer. So, since Sana-chan was so resistant to this engagement, your dear sister has decided to take responsibility herself, even if it means making a personal sacrifice. Sirafal clenched her fists, her eyes sparkling as she declared her so-called righteous intentions. Cool speech, right? Surely that would earn some points in Sana's heart. Unnecessary. Sana's voice was cold. She calmly adjusted her glasses and continued, this is my business. I don't need my sister interfering. Hi. Sirafal blinked, visibly stunned. But after a moment, her expression shifted, as if she realized something. Given Sana's personality, it wasn't surprising that she wouldn't easily accept help from others. However, when it came to someone like Lynn, Sana had no control at all. Besides, Sirafal leaned closer, her tone lowering. Sana, you must have heard a little about this. Sana raised an eyebrow, puzzled. Sirafal continued, the engagement arranged by the Satrai family, was originally meant for me. Sana's expression froze for a moment, then she pressed her lips tightly together, saying nothing. Of course, she knew. That had always been part of what made her so resistant to the engagement. Sirafal had inherited the title of Leviathan and left the Satrai family, so she no longer had to fulfill the arranged marriage. But everyone in the Satrai family knew how Sirafal had felt back then. The man she had been meant to marry had disappeared without a trace. Naturally, she had no interest in fulfilling an engagement to someone who was gone. And so, the responsibility was conveniently pushed onto Sana. That had always been one of Sana's deepest frustrations. Why should she be the one to go through with the engagement, just because her sister didn't want to? Of course. She also understood that the only reason she could even consider objecting was because of her sister's position and influence. Still, Sana had always wanted to fight for her own decisions. But now, there was a flicker of determination in her eyes. From the moment her sister mentioned cancelling the engagement, Sana fully understood her own feelings. She no longer wanted to cancel it. Sirafal, still unaware of what was going through Sana's mind, stood up straight and declared, since I was the one who stepped away, I should be the one to make up for it. I can't let you suffer for my mistake. Sana narrowed her eyes. So, sister, are you saying you intend to fulfill the engagement in my place? Sirafal looked away awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. Sana's gaze turned sharp. Why didn't you say this before? Back when Lynn had first vanished, before they realized he was still alive. Sirafal's eyes darted nervously. Sana frowned as she stared at her sister's guilty expression. Was there something more to this story that she didn't know? Forget it. Sana chose not to dig further, but her tone became firm. I already said. I will not cancel the engagement. Sirafal was stunned. After a moment of hesitation, she asked, didn't you always want to cancel it? It wasn't until then that Sirafal noticed something odd about Sana. From the moment she'd mentioned cancelling the engagement, Sana's attitude had been cold, even angry. Her expression was nothing like the relief Sirafal had expected. Why? Sirafal narrowed her eyes, watching Sana closely. After a brief pause, Sirafal cautiously asked, Sana, don't tell me. Do you really want to marry Lynn? A faint blush crept onto Sana's face, though she forced herself to remain calm. My choices aren't something for you to worry about. Ah, that confirmed it. Sirafal's expression shifted. So that's it. What a sin. Sirafal placed her hands firmly on Sana's shoulders, leaning in seriously. Sana, you can't handle Lynn. Let your big sister take over. Sana brushed her hands away, glaring coldly. There's no need. I'm a bit tired now. Please leave, sister. Sirafal. Is she kicking me out? Sirafal felt a bit hurt. Sana, that engagement was supposed to be mine originally. Sana remained calm. The moment you gave it up, it became mine. Tisk. Sirafal rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. How did things turn out like this? Hadn't Sana always wanted out of the engagement? Was it really because Lynn was just that attractive? Well, it's true that Lynn has his charms. But still. Sirafal gritted her teeth. Fine. If that's how Sana wants to play it. I'm not giving up that easily. Sirafal smiled slyly. Sana, whether you like it or not. This isn't something you get to decide alone. Sana's expression turned cold. If you're serious about trying to take this from me, then I'll challenge you to a rating game. Sirafal blinked. Hi. Did she hear that right? With Sana's current power, wasn't it obvious that she'd lose against a Mu? But was Sana really willing to go that far over this engagement? Is this really the same calm, rational Sana she had always known? Sana said nothing more. She turned and walked past Sirafal, leaving the student council room. Bang! The door slammed shut behind her. Sirafal stood there for a long moment, deep in thought. Sana's stubbornness had completely caught her off guard. Tisk. She really couldn't tell how far things had already progressed between Lynn and Sana. Sirafal scratched her head. She needed to investigate this properly. On the other side. After leaving the student council room, Sana stood silently in the hallway, gazing up at the sky outside Kuah Academy. She let out a quiet sigh. She hadn't expected that, besides Rias, even her own sister would become her rival. Trying to steal away her engagement to Lynn. Why was this happening? From the moment they last met, Sana had already sensed there was something between her sister and Lynn. Otherwise, why would her sister have shown that kind of expression when seeing him again? This time, saying she wanted to help her cancel the engagement? Sana could see right through it. Sirafal hadn't come here to help her. It was for herself. Because of Lynn. But Sana clenched her fists tightly. She would never hand Lynn over to anyone else. Not even her sister. Even if it meant challenging Sirafal to a rating game. Sana knew clearly the difference in power between her and her sister. As a Mu, Sirafal could easily shift the engagement to herself. Even as the Satrai family's heir, Sana might not be able to stop it. So, the only option left was to declare a rating game challenge. Even if she couldn't win. At least this way, she could prove her resolve to her sister, to Rias, and most importantly, to Lynn. Thinking of Lynn, Sana's cheeks flushed softly. Her heartbeat quickened. When had her feelings toward this engagement begun to change? It had shifted from resistance, to expectation. To desire. And now, to a fierce unwillingness to let go. Sana spaced out for a moment. Memories of their first encounter surfaced in her mind. That scene. That moment when things had become so intense. Without realizing it, she pressed her thighs together, her breath quickening. That pure white. She had never washed it. Instead, she kept it tucked away in her personal space. It was her first time feeling something like that. She couldn't help but collect it. AHH. So embarrassing. At the same time, Sirafal arrived at the Occult Research Club. Hello, hello. Is Sertsk's little sister here? Rias narrowed her eyes. What? Lady Leviathan. Inside the Supernatural Research Club. Seeing Sirafal enter, Rias was momentarily surprised. She quickly put down the tea in her hand, stood up, and was about to greet her respectfully. But Sirafal casually waved her hand, stopping her. Without hesitation, Sirafal sat down on the sofa and immediately got to the point. So, how far have Lynn and Sana progressed? Rias's expression became a little odd. Why was Sirafal asking about this so suddenly? Rias felt a wave of unease. Could it be that Lin's recent display of strength had satisfied the Citrai family and Sirafal, prompting them to push the engagement forward? Please, no. Rias kept a calm face, but she was screaming internally. Still, in response to Sirafal's question, Rias chose to answer honestly. Well, there hasn't been much progress between them so far. From what she knew, and based on the information she had received from Konako, Sana and Lynn had barely spent any private time together. Thinking of this, Rias felt a bit relieved. She proceeded to share everything she knew with Sirafal. After listening, Sirafal's expression became strange. So, in other words, it's Sana who has feelings for Lynn, but nothing has happened yet. Rias nodded slightly, though still feeling unsure. That should be the case. Hearing this, Sirafal leaned back on the sofa, letting out a breath of relief. She had been worried that Sana might already be as involved with Lynn as Kateria. But now, it seemed she had been overthinking. Sirafal shook her head and laughed softly. She had really been startled by how determined Sana looked earlier. On the other side, seeing Sirafal relax so quickly, Rias's expression turned a little complicated. Something didn't feel right about this. If the Citrai family was satisfied with Lynn, why did Sirafal seem so relieved? Rias hesitated, then tentatively asked, Lady Sirafal, does this mean the Citrai family is reconsidering the engagement? Sirafal waved her hand. Not exactly. But there may be some changes regarding Sana's engagement. Changes? Rias frowned. Sirafal sighed and pretended to look troubled. You know how Sana has never been happy with this engagement. I'm her loving older sister, after all, so for her happiness. Sirafal paused, then declared righteously, I've decided to help her cancel the engagement. Cancel the engagement? Both Akeno and Konako stopped what they were doing and looked at Sirafal in shock. Was this for real? If they had heard this before knowing about Lin's strength, it might have made sense. But now? Lin had the power of a Mu-class devil. Would the Citrai family really let go of a fiancé with such potential just for the happiness of their daughter? Akeno gave Sirafal a strange look. Could it be? Sirafal hadn't discussed this with Sana yet? Did Sana even want to cancel the engagement? But if the engagement really was cancelled, wouldn't that be great news for Rias? Akeno quietly shifted her gaze toward Rias. Then, she watched as Rias's expression went through a series of dramatic changes. Shock. Confusion. Surprise. Suppressed excitement. Joy. Secret delight. Akeno marveled at the complex series of emotions flashing across Rias's face like a performance. On the sofa, Rias tried hard to keep her expression neutral, but anyone could see the joy sparkling in her eyes. Sana, you were the one who gave up first. Rias had always known that Sana would never proactively ask to cancel the engagement. But whether Sana was willing or not, Rias didn't care. This was her chance. If the engagement between Lin and Sana was dissolved, she could immediately propose changing the fiancé to herself. The Gremory family and her brother would surely support her fully. As for the Phoenix family? They were pure-blooded, yes, but their value could not compare to a young, rising Mu-class devil like Lin. However, just as Rias was about to get too excited, Sirafal's tone suddenly shifted. With that said, even if it means sacrificing myself, I am prepared to do it. Wait, what? Rias's expression froze. Sacrificing herself? What did that mean? Akeno and Konako also looked at Sirafal, confused. This was not going where they had expected. With a serious expression, Sirafal slapped the table and declared, So, I've decided to fulfill the engagement with Lin on Sana's behalf. Rias's entire face was filled with question marks. What did she mean by taking over the engagement? Who asked you to take over? Akeno and Konako were equally dumbfounded. Was this really happening? The Supernatural Research Club fell into stunned silence. No one knew how to respond to Sirafal's bold declaration. It took a long moment before Rias finally managed to speak. So, what you're saying is, Lin's future fiancé is going to be you, Lady Leviathan. That's right. Sirafal nodded confidently. She showed absolutely no shame about stealing her own sister's fiancé. Rias's eye twitched violently. How could this be considered dissolving the engagement? Wasn't this just replacing Sana with an even stronger competitor? In that case, did she still even have a chance? Rias opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. Akeno looked at Rias with concern. At first, they thought this might be good news, but now, it was clear things had gotten even worse. Konako, meanwhile, had paused for a moment, then calmly resumed eating her snacks as she watched the situation unfold. She occasionally shook her head and sighed in her heart. These devils are really hopeless. Still arguing over marriage contracts and fiancés like this. Meanwhile, countless girls from various factions had already shared a bed with Lin. Even she herself had tasted Lin's sweetness. Thinking about it, Konako's face turned a little red. But, because of her sister, she had never truly experienced Lin's full affection. Sigh. When would she finally become an adult? She also wanted to bear Lin's child one day, just like her sister. Konako rested her chin on her hand, quietly lost in thought. At the same time, at the Fallen Angels' headquarters, the report that Lynn had single-handedly destroyed the old Mu faction had already reached their ears. Him again. Azazel, who had been deeply engrossed in research on artificial sacred gears, was forced to put down his work. Staring at the intel in front of him, he couldn't help but sigh. The old Mu faction was not some minor force. Lynn had crushed them entirely, and he had done it alone. Even Azazel wouldn't have dared to attempt that. Thinking of this, Azazel narrowed his eyes. Lin's strength was clearly more than just being able to kill Cockabile in an instant. With what he had displayed so far, he was at least at the level of a superclass devil. Azazel stared at Lin's file thoughtfully. There would definitely be a place for Lynn at the upcoming three factions meeting. Nearby, after hearing the report, Vala's eyes burned with fighting spirit. Though his expression also showed a hint of awkwardness. After all, the organization he had just joined was now gone. Completely wiped out. This was hard to process. In the underworld, at the now ruined base of the old Mu faction, a young man with silver hair and red eyes quietly surveyed the desolate surroundings. Siegfried stroked his chin, deep in thought. The Chaos Brigade's old Mu faction had been annihilated by just one person. But it didn't seem to have anything to do with the hero faction. Still, Siegfried narrowed his eyes. CAO would definitely be interested in this Lynn Valifor. Meanwhile, deep within the Chaos Brigade's territory, on the throne, the black-haired girl sitting high above slowly opened her eyes. The power of the snake. It's been completely absorbed. Off-eyes could no longer sense even the slightest trace of its presence. What exactly had happened? There was an odd, faint sense of connection to something else. Off-eyes fell into silent contemplation. Lynn Manor. After returning from Natsuki Minamiya's place, Lynn began to examine his current condition. Having reached the transcendent level, his strength had undergone a qualitative change. The evil pieces and devil summoning systems did not seem to show any noticeable changes. However, what caught his attention was the power of the snake that had been fed back from Kateria Leviathan. Lynn raised his hand, and a shadow began to condense slowly. Deep within a dark palace, a young girl with long black hair sat on a throne. Her face was expressionless as she sat quietly, her black eyes devoid of emotion. Suddenly, Off-Eyes turned her head, tilting it curiously as her eyes calmly locked onto Lynn. Seeing her, Lynn raised an eyebrow in surprise. The Infinite Dragon God. Lynn was a little taken aback. The power of the snake he had absorbed from Kateria Leviathan had somehow allowed him to directly manifest a projection of the Infinite Dragon God, Off-Eyes. This doesn't seem right. Lynn frowned slightly. He recalled that Kateria Leviathan had an ability capable of summoning the phantom of the Infinite Dragon God. Serpent Contract of Off-Eyes. Summon the phantom of the Infinite Dragon. Effects: increases all stats by 30%, casting time reduced to instant. Activates space blockade, preventing enemies within range from using teleportation or escape abilities. Lynn opened his personal status screen to double-check, then murmured, as I thought. He had not mistaken it. But, in his impression, that projection was supposed to be just a phantom without expression or thought. Yet the shadow in Lynn's hand right now was completely different. It was vivid, lifelike, and... Is that you? Off-Eyes' voice echoed, calm and indifferent. Lynn's expression grew complicated. She was actually communicating with him through the projection? But... What do you mean by is that me? Following his principle of asking questions when unsure, Lynn asked directly, what's going on with me? Off-Eyes stared at him closely and responded flatly, the power of the snake was severed by you. Lynn narrowed his eyes. Although he didn't fully grasp her meaning, that one sentence revealed some key information. Off-Eyes, her connection to the power of the snake had been cut off. Was it because of Kateria being reincarnated as one of his peerage members through the evil piece? Or was it because of the demise of the old Mu faction? No matter the cause, it was clearly connected to him. Lynn shrugged. If that's the case, then I suppose I'm the one responsible. He kept his tone relaxed, but inwardly he remained cautious. Even though Off-Eyes appeared harmless in the original story, Lynn knew better than to let his guard down. After all, this was the Infinite Dragon God. Currently ranked as the second strongest being in the world. Even as a transcendent, Lynn didn't have enough confidence to go head-to-head with such an existence. Tisk. He wondered whether the power gained from inbuilt Leviathan would be effective against a being like Off-Eyes. After all, Off-Eyes was a dragon too. But, of course, Lynn had no intention of testing that theory recklessly. For now, at least, she didn't show any hostility. In fact, Lynn looked at Off-Eyes carefully. There was no malice coming from her at all. If anything, it felt strangely neutral, maybe even leaning toward goodwill. Still, Off-Eyes herself didn't seem to notice the thoughts running through Lin's mind about whether he could abduct her. She quietly continued observing the snake power entwined around Lin, power that did not originate from her. That snake. Was it from her? As the thought surfaced, a flicker of confusion passed through Off-Eyes' usually emotionless eyes. But she could not be mistaken. Yet. Why? The power of snakes should belong solely to her. Now, standing before her was someone who possessed the same concept of infinity. It was faint, incomplete, but undeniably there. Family. The word briefly echoed through Off-Eyes' mind, stirring emotions that had remained calm for so long. How strange. Off-Eyes didn't understand what she was feeling right now, but she didn't sense any rejection toward Lin. Rather, she felt a strange sense of familiarity. An inexplicable urge to get closer. But she reminded herself of the dream, the being that had driven her away from her home. Her expression calmed again. She still needed the Cow's Brigade. She still needed to reclaim her home from that dreamlike enemy. With that thought, Off-Eyes waved her hand, dispersing the projection hovering over Lin's palm. However, just before the projection vanished, a sphere of energy emerged from it. At the same time, Off-Eyes' calm voice echoed faintly. Your infinity is too weak. Grow stronger quickly. There was a subtle expectation hidden within her words. Perhaps if Lin became stronger, he could stand beside her one day, help her drive the dream from her home. A few seconds later, the projection fully dissipated. Lin stared silently at the grey mist of energy left floating before him, still swirling chaotically. This projection could actually influence reality? She really was worthy of being called the world's second strongest. Lin let out a soft sigh and fell into thought. This must be the true power of the snake. But what did Off-Eyes mean by all of this? Infinity. Did she intend to pass it on to him? Just as Lin was pondering, the snake power within him fed back from Kateria Leviathan suddenly surged outward. A faint sense of longing echoed from deep within his being. Lin raised an eyebrow and fixed his gaze on the grey mist of energy left behind by Off-Eyes. After a brief hesitation, he reached out and touched it. Buzz. The instant his fingertips made contact, the grey mist reacted as though called by something, flowing smoothly into his body. Lin narrowed his eyes. Buzz. However, under his control, the grey mist halted its advance. Using his magic, Lin carefully inspected the grey energy. Confirming that there were no hidden dangers, he slowly released his control. The next moment, the snake within him, the one gifted through Kateria Leviathan, immediately devoured the grey mist. A system prompt sounded. Ding! You have obtained the skill, Ouroboros Ring. Lin raised his eyebrows, quickly checking the skill description. Ouroboros Ring. The closed loop of flesh and blood. Self-regeneration, snake scale patterns will form on injured areas, accelerating regeneration by consuming one's own flesh and blood. Energy circulation, after releasing magic or physical power, 60% will flow back into the body, forming the core of the perpetual motion system. Status, unfinished. Lin rubbed his chin, studying the skill carefully. It appeared to be a powerful self-recovery ability. Stronger than Recovery Devil in its regenerative properties. But the key difference was clear. Ouroboros Ring was a self-buff skill, while Recovery Devil functioned as a group support ability. Their functions were fundamentally different. Furthermore, Lin's gaze sharpened. The word unfinished caught his attention. It reminded him of the apoptosis genome ability he already possessed. Somehow, Ouroboros Ring felt like it was holding back something even greater. Off-Eyes had really given him quite the gift. Feeling a mix of curiosity and anticipation, Lin closed his status screen, his thoughts drifting back to Off-Eyes' words. Why had she done this? What was she thinking? The logic behind Off-Eyes' actions eluded him. But if this interaction was any indication, his chances of drawing Off-Eyes to his side had just risen significantly. Your infinity is too weak. Remembering her words, Lin smiled faintly. He really wanted to tell her. If you, Off-Eyes, join my peerage, I'll show you how quickly my infinity can grow. Maybe I should try persuading her next time. She seems like she'd be easy to convince. As Lin continued to entertain the idea of how to lure in the cute infinite dragon, his phone suddenly rang. The caller ID, Yukinashita Harano. Lin answered. Master. Harano's bright voice came through the phone. We caught a secret agent trying to infiltrate the company. Are you coming over to handle her personally? When she mentioned the word handle, her tone became particularly suggestive. Lin raised an eyebrow. This woman was definitely implying something. Is the agent good enough to be considered for the peerage? Of course. Lin wasn't surprised. If the infiltrator hadn't been talented, Harano would have dealt with the issue herself without bothering him. Meanwhile, in the Lin Group's underground prison recently expanded for such occasions. Harano, still on the phone, turned to look at Kurosaka Sayaka, who was tightly restrained. The smile on Harano's face was bright, yet to Sayaka, it looked like the grin of a devil. And then, hearing the clear male voice from Harano's phone, Kurosaka Sayaka's body trembled uncontrollably. Punishment? Wait. Could it be? Her thoughts ran wild, imagining all sorts of shameful scenarios. But given her own circumstances, even the more extreme scenes somehow felt acceptable to her. So next, she would be? Her breathing grew ragged. Oxygen felt scarce. Her eyes rolled back. With a soft thud, Kurosaka Sayaka fainted on the spot. Harano blinked. Ah! She fainted. Tokyo. Lion King Organization. Shiranakariki looked at Koyomi Shizuka expectantly and asked, "So? Did you find anything?" Koyomi Shizuka remained calm, kneeling properly on the tatami floor, and nodded. Lynn Valafor, a senior student at Shuchen Academy, and the director of the Supernatural Investigation Club. She had already discovered this much after witnessing Lynn's overwhelming power the other day. Moreover, the Supernatural Investigation Club had become quite infamous within Shuchen. Though the reputation wasn't necessarily good, it saved Koyomi Shizuka a lot of time in her investigation. Shiranakariki's expression twisted strangely. Such a powerful figure, hiding in a school, pretending to be a student? What kind of hobby is that? But this information alone was still insufficient. It wasn't enough to deal a decisive blow to Lynn. Unable to hold back, Shiranakariki asked, "Anything else? Does he have any particular hobbies?" Hobbies? Koyomi Shizuka pursed her lips. He seems to enjoy building a harem. Hi. Shiranakariki was stunned. A harem? She looked at Koyomi Shizuka with disbelief, as if she had misheard. However, Koyomi Shizuka nodded seriously and began explaining the rumors circulating about the so-called Supernatural Investigation Club, which many referred to as the Harem Club. And in the spirit of proper investigation, Koyomi Shizuka had personally looked into the matter. Within Shuchen Academy alone, several beautiful girls were already part of this so-called Supernatural Investigation Club. Even more telling was the appearance of various girls on campus who weren't even students at Shuchen. This clearly indicated that Lynn's recruitment was no longer confined to the school. To make it worse, Koyomi Shizuka had accidentally learned this from Miura Yumiko, who spoke of another subgroup within the club called the Service Department. The moment Koyomi Shizuka heard that name, her expression had become indescribable. Service Department? Shiranakariki's face twitched. She let out a bitter laugh. This moose taste is surprisingly straightforward. Koyomi Shizuka hesitated for a moment but continued, "There's another thing. It's said that the Witch of the Void also has a very close relationship with Lynn Valafor." Koyomi Shizuka had seen it herself. The way Natsuki Minamiya and Lynn interacted that day made it obvious they were well acquainted. She had also heard from Yumiko Miura that when she tried reporting the situation to Natsuki, the result was nothing. Not only did the Supernatural Investigation Club go unpunished, but their activity room had been expanded. Back then, Yumiko had suspected that Natsuki was deliberately shielding Lynn. Maybe Natsuki Minamiya was also one of Lynn's harem members? It wasn't until Lynn displayed his power alongside Natsuki Minamiya that Yumiko understood everything. They were beings from another world. That also explained what Yuki Nashida and Yui had been up to. Damn it! Why hadn't she realized this sooner? If she had, maybe she could have crossed into that other world like Yui had. Koyomi Shizuka finished sharing all this information with Shiranakariki. The Witch of the Void. Shiranakariki muttered, grinding her teeth. Natsuki Minamiya. As expected of a witch. There's such a dangerous individual in human society, yet we received no intel on her. Given how little they knew about Lynn's personality, it was only natural for Shiranakariki to feel uneasy. She cursed Natsuki Minamiya silently for a while before shifting her focus back to the key information Koyomi Shizuka had brought. The harem department. Shiranakariki's expression turned dark. But at the very least, Koyomi Shizuka had indeed brought back valuable intel. He likes building a harem. Then why not just offer him a few more? Shiranakariki's eyes lit up as the idea struck her. Koyomi Shizuka. Yukari. Both of them were stunned by Shiranakariki's blunt proposal. But they couldn't deny. It fit the situation perfectly. However, Yukari hesitated. But, ordinary women probably won't catch the eye of a mole like him, right? Shiranakariki waved her hand dismissively. Don't we have our own highly trained priestesses at the Lion King organization? Yukari's expression stiffened. You don't mean Yukina, do you? She grew visibly agitated. She had just watched as Kurosaka Sayaka got caught up in this mess, and now they were about to send another of her apprentices into the fire? This was too cruel. No. I object. Yukari's voice was firm and unwavering. Besides, the Miko I've worked so hard to train, you're just going to give her away as someone else's dependent. Shiranakariki replied calmly, you said it yourself, didn't you? They are shrine maidens. You should understand better than anyone what their role is meant to be. Yukari fell silent. Shiranakariki continued, if sacrificing a few shrine maidens helps clear the misunderstanding with the Mu and even earns his favor, I say it's a worthwhile trade. In my eyes, this is a guaranteed win. Yukari lowered her gaze. The logic was hard to argue with. But still. She muttered, then, why does it have to be Yukina? Shiranakariki gave her a calm glance. It doesn't have to be Himuragi Yukina. Yukari's eyes lit up slightly in relief. Until Shiranakariki followed up with a smirk, you could always go in her place, Yukari. Yukari. If we're talking about talented shrine maidens who might catch the eye of the Mu, you're the best choice, Yukari. Shirana's tone made it clear what she was suggesting. Yukari's expression twitched violently. I'm too old. The Mu probably doesn't appreciate my type. After a moment, she changed the subject and added quickly, Shio is still young and has great potential. She's the better choice. Which is why, let's send Yukina after all. Shiranakariki stared at her coldly, her eyes filled with contempt. Koyomi Shizuka pursed her lips, unsure how to respond. Hey, hey, hey! Yukari waved her paws, clearly unhappy. Don't give me that look. Becoming the Mu's Miko is a once-in-a-lifetime blessing. As her master, of course I want my apprentice to enjoy such good fortune. That's what a responsible master does. She sounded almost righteous about it. Shiranakariki replied perfunctorily, sure, sure. So, Yukari. I'll leave the task of notifying Himuragi Setsuna to you. Yukari. Wasn't this just pushing the dirty work onto her? You're downright evil, Shiranakariki. You're trying to ruin my relationship with my apprentice. Before Yukari could protest further, Koyomi Shizuka suddenly asked, speaking of which, what about Kirasaka Sayaka? Are we just abandoning her? The room went quiet. Shiranakariki and Yukari exchanged glances, then responded in unison. We'll send her to Lord Lin as a Miko too. Although, that might already be a bit too late. By the way, Koyomi Shizuka's tone turned awkward. If we just openly send shrine maidens to the Mu's harem like this, won't that ruin the reputation of the Lion King organization? Shiranakariki fell silent for a moment before responding righteously, what harem? I told you already. They are Mikos. Shrine maidens. And according to the Mu's terminology, they're called peerage. What harem? That word sounds so crude. Calling them Mikos or dependents sounds much more dignified. Meanwhile, after the high-level meeting of the Lion King organization concluded, Yukari returned, her black cat Shikigami vanishing into the shadows. She turned to look at Himuragi Yukina, who was training diligently, her expression complicated. How was she supposed to break the news? She couldn't just walk up to Yukina and say, the higher UPS have decided to send you to the Mu's bed, right? That would completely ruin her image as the beloved master in Yukina's heart. Yukari's expression grew serious. She had to find a better way. After thinking for a while, her eyes suddenly sparkled with inspiration. Got it. Her expression shifted quickly as she put on an exaggerated look of sorrow. With a heavy sigh, she called out, Yukina. Himuragi Yukina stopped her training and looked over at her master. Seeing Yukari's unusually somber face, Yukina's heart instantly grew uneasy. Master, what happened? Yukina hurried over, concern filling her voice. Ah! Yukari sighed again, her tone full of sorrow. Yukina. Sayaka. Himuragi Yukina's eyes widened in alarm. What happened to Sayaka? Well. Yukari sighed once more, watching as Yukina grew more and more anxious. Seeing her apprentice this nervous, Yukari's expression became even more sorrowful as she spoke slowly, she was captured by the Mu. Himuragi Yukina's eyes widened in shock. Her body stiffened, and she fell to the ground, unable to process what she had just heard. How could this happen? Her mind went blank as panic and grief surged within her. But almost immediately, determination returned to her eyes. She tightly gripped her beloved spear, the Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer, and stood up firmly. I'm going to save her. Wait. Yukari quickly grabbed her arm to stop her. Yukina turned to her, eyes filled with urgency. Master. Yukari shook her head with a grave expression. Yukina, listen to me. It's useless. That person is a Mu. Hearing this, Yukina's grip on her weapon loosened slightly. The Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer fell to the floor with a soft clang as she stood there frozen, despair spreading across her face. She knew. She knew how wide the gap was between herself and someone at the level of a Mu. But still. Even so, she clenched her fists tightly. Even if it meant certain death, she wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. Just as Yukina was about to pick up her spear again, Yukari suddenly softened her tone. Actually, there might be a way to save Sayaka. Yukina's body trembled. She immediately looked at her master with hopeful eyes. Master! Tell me! Please! Is there a way? Yukari smiled faintly, her expression oddly gentle as she leaned closer and whispered the answer into Yukina's ear. Honey trap! Himuragi Yukina froze. Her face was blank for a few seconds as her mind processed the words. Hi! Yukina blinked slowly, her brain clearly struggling to catch up. Honey trap! Honey trap! Yukina stared at Yukari in disbelief, then pointed at herself, her finger trembling slightly. Me! Yukari nodded solemnly. After unanimous approval from the higher UPS. Yukina! You are undoubtedly the most suitable person to carry out this plan. Yukina's eyelids twitched hard. Why? Does this sound so unreliable? Yukina hesitated. Seeing her reaction, Yukari leaned closer to her ear and spoke softly, Yukina, you wouldn't want Sayaka to be. Yukina's eyes widened instantly. Yukari continued, her tone full of pity, poor Sayaka. You know how afraid she is of men. If she were to fall into their hands. I really don't know what might happen to her. Yukari even pretended to wipe away tears, putting on a sorrowful act. The image of Sayaka, one of the few friends always by her side, being treated horribly by some man flashed through Yukina's mind. Her heart tightened as she clenched her fists. I'll go. Yukina's voice was firm. She had to save Sayaka from the devil's clutches. Determination burned in her eyes. Seeing this, Yukari immediately stopped crying, placed both hands on Yukina's shoulders, and said with relief, Yukina, I knew I could count on you. Yukina. Seeing Yukari like this, she suddenly felt a little uneasy. Could it be? She had been tricked by her master again? Suspicion flashed through Yukina's eyes. But Yukari's expression remained perfectly calm. After observing for a while, Yukina couldn't find any flaws in her master's expression. For now, she could only temporarily put aside her doubts. At the very least, the fact that Sayaka had been captured by the devil couldn't possibly be a lie. Her master wouldn't be shameless enough to joke about something like this, right? Ahem. Yukari coughed twice, breaking the awkward atmosphere, and began briefing Yukina on the mission details. After a while, Yukina stood quietly, eyes closed, digesting the information. Lynn. A senior at Tokyo Private Shuchen Academy, president of the Supernatural Investigation Club, also known as the president of the Harem Club. When she heard the words Harem Club, Yukina's expression became complicated. No wonder the master wanted to use a beauty trap. So this was the reason. He stood at the top of the pyramid, yet his hobby was so vulgar. But that was precisely why Yukina felt even more anxious. Sayaka was a beauty after all, with a great figure. If she had truly been captured by a devil so obsessed with building a harem. Sayaka. Yukina clenched her fists tightly. I must rescue Sayaka as soon as possible. But becoming part of Lynn's harem? This mission felt delicate in every possible sense. Yukari continued, the organization has arranged the transfer procedures for you. You will be able to enter Shuchen starting tomorrow. Yukina pressed her lips together and let out a soft hum. Seeing this, Yukari nodded with satisfaction and said, once you're inside Shuchen, your main goal is to become one of Lynn's peerage members. She explained seriously, we don't know Sayaka's exact whereabouts right now, but as long as you become one of Lynn's followers, you'll definitely be able to get information on her. Yukina fell silent, muttering to herself, become a peerage member. As an excellent sword shaman trained by the Lion King organization, Yukina knew well what it meant to become a devil's follower. Becoming a peerage member meant becoming a devil. Yukina froze, feeling conflicted. But when she thought of Sayaka, she sighed helplessly. I understand. For Sayaka's sake, she was willing to give up her humanity. But how will I return to normal after the mission is over? Yukina looked troubled. Yukari's expression froze for a moment, then she gave a forced smile and said awkwardly, haha, well, the higher UPS. I'll do my best to find a solution. Yukina's face twitched, staring at Yukari silently. Looking at her master's guilty expression. Could it be that there wasn't even a plan for her to return to being human? Yukari quickly averted her gaze and muttered under her breath, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Yukina, you wouldn't want to. Stop. Yukina raised her hand, cutting Yukari off before she could say anything more. She took a deep breath and replied calmly, I'll do it. Sigh. Yukari let out a sigh in her heart. It was called a honey trap. But in reality, she was sending Yukina directly into the arms of the Mu. In the worst-case scenario, even Sayaka might never return. Well, if Yukina found out the truth, would she fight her master to the death? Yukari felt a little uneasy at the thought. But there was no other choice. If her disciple didn't go, it would be Yukari's turn. Besides, according to the intel Koyomi Shizuka had brought back, becoming one of Lin's peerage members wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The members of the Supernatural Investigation Club at Shuchen all seemed to be doing quite well. Maybe this was an opportunity for Yukina too. After all, becoming a devil's peerage member wasn't easy. Yukari consoled herself with this thought, easing her guilt just a little. Not long after, Yukina packed her bags and headed toward the rental house near Shuchen. The location of the apartment was right next to Lin's previous residence. Meeting room. Shiranakariki looked at the visibly depressed Kuroneko and asked expressionlessly, "Has Yukina left?" The black cat responded weakly with a nod. Seeing this, Shirana let out a soft sigh of relief. Hopefully, everything would go smoothly. At the same time, Lin Group, underground chamber. A black magic circle appeared out of thin air. Master. Yukinashita Harano immediately rushed toward Lin upon seeing him. She hugged Lin's arm tightly, rubbing herself against him affectionately. "I heard you were attacked, Master. I was so worried." Lin hadn't returned to the manor the entire night. Although everyone knew how strong Lin was, his peerage members still couldn't help but worry. However, Harano suddenly paused, sniffing the air around Lin carefully. A strange glint flashed in her eyes. It wasn't the scent of any of the girls in the peerage. Harano narrowed her eyes and asked curiously, "Did someone new join the peerage?" Lin nodded. Harano immediately followed up confidently, "Someone from the old Mu faction." Lin patted her head and praised, "So smart." Harano rolled her eyes. Master, don't treat me like a child." But, as expected of Master, Harano's expression became a bit strange. No matter where he went, a harem would naturally form around him. Speaking of harems, Harano suddenly remembered something important. She turned her gaze toward the bound Kirasaka Sayaka and said, "Master, this is her." Harano raised an eyebrow like a mama-san showing off her goods. "Well? Not bad, right?" Lin rubbed his chin, his gaze sweeping over Sayaka's curvy figure. He nodded in approval. "Very good. More importantly, the evil piece was indeed glowing faintly. Another excellent candidate for the peerage." Lin opened the prison cell door and crouched in front of Sayaka. He reached out, pinched her chin, and lifted her face. Sayaka let out a soft groan. As if feeling the touch on her face, she frowned slightly and slowly opened her eyes. Then, the first thing that came into her view was Lin's face. Sayaka froze for a moment, then her eyes widened as she stammered, man. Buzz." Sayaka instantly turned as red as a cooked crab. Goosebumps rose across her entire body as she trembled uncontrollably. Her vision blurred, her brain shut down, and her head tilted back as she fainted on the spot. Her body twitched like a fish out of water. "Lin. Harano. She." Harano's expression grew complicated. It was the first time she'd seen something like this. And it seemed she fainted again for no apparent reason. Lin explained calmly, "Androphobia." Although a long time had passed, he still vaguely remembered hearing about it. Androphobia. Harano's eyes widened in realization. No wonder. So the reason she fainted earlier was because she heard I was coming to punish her? The corner of Harano's eye twitched slightly. This condition. Isn't this a bit too serious? Harano stared at the unconscious Sayaka, then turned to Lin. "So, what should we do now?" Lin's eyes flashed with a strange light. The corners of his lips curled into a faint smile. "If I want to take her into the peerage, I'll need to give her some desensitization training." Harano saw the devilish grin on Lin's face and felt a chill run down her spine. She turned her gaze back to Sayaka, lying there completely unconscious. At that moment, Harano could only feel deep sympathy for Sayaka. Because now, Lin was truly going to punish her. Lin Group. Lin was leaning back on the sofa, with the unconscious Sayaka lying in his arms. He raised his hand and cast a sobering spell into Sayaka's body. Sayaka let out a soft groan as the magic forced her awake. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Lin's face. Her breathing became rapid, and dizziness struck her again. Seeing this, Lin spoke in a calm but dark tone, "Every time you faint, I'll take off one piece of your clothing." Sayaka instantly snapped awake, glaring at Lin through gritted teeth. "Shameless! You shameless devil!" Lin remained calm, but his hand reached for Sayaka's chest, unbuttoning her clothes one by one. Wait! Startled, Sayaka hurriedly grabbed Lin's wrist. "Hi!" The moment her hand touched him, Sayaka felt as if she had been electrocuted. Her hand trembled uncontrollably as she quickly pulled it back. Seeing this, Lin narrowed his eyes slightly. The corners of his mouth curled up as he continued to unbutton her clothes. Sayaka's body began to tremble. She clenched her teeth and said in a trembling voice, "I'm not fainting yet." Lin replied calmly, "I'm counting from last time." Sayaka's expression froze. "Why, you shameless bastard? Breathing heavily, she grabbed Lin's wrist again, no longer caring about the skin contact between them. But her strength alone was not enough to stop Lin's movements. No, please, don't. Her voice trembled, with a hint of pleading. Crash. In the next moment, her coat was tossed to the floor by Lynn. Ah! Sayaka's eyes widened in shock. She couldn't bear the stimulation and fainted again. Lynn shook his head. Still not enough. The desensitization training had to continue. He cast another sobering spell into her body. Evil, devil. Sayaka regained consciousness, her voice shaking. Lynn smiled faintly. Congratulations, you got it right. Then, without mercy, he continued to remove her clothes one by one as she watched helplessly. Sayaka's eyes filled with tears, and her body trembled uncontrollably. Lynn remained indifferent, steadily unbuttoning each piece of clothing. Sayaka fainted again and again. Until Sayaka lay completely naked in Lynn's arms, her body twitching from time to time. Her dull eyes were wet, saliva hung from the corners of her lips, and she looked like she had been thoroughly broken. Lynn's large hand slid across her smooth skin, kneading it gently at times. There were only so many pieces of clothing, not enough to keep her fainting through the process. So, Lynn could only continue the desensitization by working directly on her body. His firm fingers traced along her curves, moving across the soft mounds of her chest. Following his movements, Sayaka's body arched sharply. Ah! Her eyes widened as a suppressed yet crisp moan escaped from her lips. Her body trembled violently. No, not like this. Sayaka's body shuddered intensely. Crash! A sudden fountain-like spray erupted from her body. Harano, standing nearby, was stunned. There's actually such a skill. Lynn's hand paused slightly, a flicker of intrigue flashing in his eyes. But he didn't stop. He simply continued to observe her quietly. After a while, Sayaka's body calmed down. She remained unresponsive, like a lifeless doll in Lynn's arms. Lynn resumed his movements, but Sayaka offered no resistance, completely limp in his grasp. Seeing this, Lynn finally stopped. He spoke calmly, desensitization successful. Harano's expression twitched. Is this really what you call desensitization? Lynn tossed Sayaka onto the sofa and casually shook his hands. Harano asked curiously, aren't you going to take her into your peerage now? Lynn replied, I'll wait until she wakes up. Oh. Harano nodded, then leaned closer to Lynn with a flirtatious smile. She pressed against him and exhaled softly, then, this is a rare chance. Would you like to enjoy yourself here, master? She tilted her head, lightly nibbling on Lynn's ear, her breath hot against his neck. Lynn narrowed his eyes and pulled her into his embrace. Soon, the sound of fierce activity echoed throughout the Lynn group office. Sayaka was awakened by the sounds. She turned her head toward the source of the noise, her eyes still dazed. But then, her eyes widened suddenly. Silver chaos. Her face flushed bright pink as she quickly covered her eyes with her hands. But through the gaps between her fingers, her eyes stared intently at the scene before her. Bang! Her heartbeat raced wildly, and her body temperature soared. Her cheeks and ears burned, and even her breath felt scalding hot. But there was a strange glint in Sayaka's eyes. The scene before her was so intense. And there was a man involved. But why didn't she faint? Sayaka curled into herself, her mouth going dry. Her gaze on Lynn was filled with confusion. Had her androphobia been cured? Sayaka's heart stirred at the thought. To test it, she casually pictured the face of a man she had passed on the street. Ha! Her body shuddered violently. Goosebumps rose all over her skin, and a chill shot from the bottom of her spine to the top of her head. Nausea welled up inside her. Her expression twisted in disgust. But the moment she turned her eyes back to Lynn, the nausea instantly vanished, replaced by a strange sense of pleasure. Ha! Sayaka let out a soft breath of relief. So, I really did recover. But just as she relaxed, her body froze again. The good news was that her androphobia had eased. The bad news was, it only worked on the devilish man in front of her. Ugh! Sayaka felt like crying but had no tears. Why did it have to turn out like this? She glanced at Lynn again, her gaze evasive. A strange feeling rose from the depths of her heart. She placed a hand on her chest, feeling confused. But the fierce sounds of activity from the other side quickly snapped her back to reality. Sayaka bit her lip, squeezed her thighs together, and rubbed them subconsciously. Huff, huff. On the other side of the room, Harano lay on the desk, enduring Lynn's relentless assault. She caught a glimpse of Sayaka's current state and smiled knowingly. There was definitely a new member joining the peerage. The next day, Shuchin Academy. Himuragi Yukina stepped through the school gates, uncertainty in her eyes. She took a deep breath, adjusted her backpack, and walked toward the school building. First year, Class 3. Unlike the noisy atmosphere of other classrooms, this class was unnaturally quiet. Even the worst troublemakers didn't dare to make a sound, fearing they might upset the boy sitting by the window in the back row. Lynn. The students of Class 3, first year, sat in silence, their bodies stiff with tension. Who would have thought? The same person who attended classes alongside them was actually someone with terrifying power. Even though he had saved them, they couldn't help but feel afraid sharing the same space with him. Gulp. The sound of someone nervously swallowing echoed loudly in the quiet room. The student quickly covered his throat, trying to muffle the sound. Lynn rested his chin on his hand, gazing out the window with a hint of helplessness. Is the atmosphere too heavy? He picked up his phone and sent a message to Natsuki Minamiya. Didn't you wipe the memories of the ordinary students? Ding. A reply came quickly. Isn't this more convenient for you to recruit peerage members at Shuchin? You have no idea how many girls want to join your harem after that day. Lynn. But what Natsuki said did make sense. Starting today, maybe a lot of people would come knocking on the door of the Supernatural Investigation Club. Poke. Suddenly, Lynn felt a soft tap on his arm. He turned his head. A cute girl with delicate features and flawless skin stood beside him. Lynn blinked, then asked, Megami, what is it? Kato Megami smiled faintly. Lin-kun always notices me so easily. And from the start, he never forgot her name. Since the beginning of the school year, that had never changed. Which made Lynn even more important in her heart. Megami tilted her head, asking curiously, is it because of your supernatural abilities? Before Lynn could reply, Megami shook her head. Minamiya-sensei doesn't notice me either. She even forgets my name. Lynn joked, your lack of presence could be considered a kind of supernatural power. Even Natsuki is affected. Maybe it's a high-level ability. Megami pouted. Lin-kun, you're teasing me again. In the classroom, the other students glanced at each other nervously. Lynn. Who is he talking to? A chill ran down their spines. A ghost? Hiss. The thought made the class restless. But the moment Lynn glanced their way, the room fell silent once more. Seeing this, Megami smiled slightly. Lin-kun, you really are like a king. Lynn shrugged. Some say I am. But I'm a devil king. Megami's eyes widened. Devil king? You mean, the Mu? Lynn nodded calmly. I see. Megami propped her chin on her hand. Then, was inviting me to your peerage just a case of Chuyunibyo? Lynn. Seeing his reaction, Megami smiled faintly. But after a moment, her expression turned serious. Thinking about the beautiful girls in the Supernatural Investigation Club, her eyes flickered slightly. She whispered, what you said before, does it still count? What did I say before? Lynn was genuinely surprised. As deskmates, they had always been close and talked about many things. So, which conversation was she referring to? Seeing the doubt on Lynn's face, Megami continued softly, of course. About inviting me to join your peerage. Shuchin Academy. First year, Class 3, back row by the window. Lynn glanced at Megami's calm face, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. See? Isn't this exactly the effect Natsuki Minamiya talked about? When he first awakened his golden finger, he had invited Kato Megami as well, but back then, she simply treated him like a Chuyunibyo. Megami had even thoughtfully tested his forehead temperature at the time, eyes full of concern. Thinking back to that moment, Lynn couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. But, in the end, she would still fall into his hands. However, some things needed to be made clear first. Lynn thought for a moment, then asked, Megami, do you understand what it means to join my peerage? Megami blinked. Thinking of the beautiful girls in the Supernatural Investigation Club, she tilted her head and replied, Become part of Lin-kun's harem. Lynn. Lynn rubbed his temples, feeling helpless. When did my reputation become that bad? Megami looked at him seriously and asked, isn't it true? Lynn paused, then shrugged. Well, not entirely wrong. Megami's expression became complicated. To admit it so openly. After all, everyone already knows. Of course, in order to avoid scaring Megami away, Lynn added, although anyone who joins my peerage is destined to be part of my harem, as the master, I will always respect my peerage members. At least until they are ready. Lynn was very calm as he spoke. After all, although they were all part of his harem, he had never taken the initiative to force anyone. Well, except for those who disobeyed. Megami fell into thought. Be prepared. What exactly does that mean? No one knew what she was imagining, but a faint blush began to spread across her usually calm face. She raised her hands and gently covered her cheeks, whispering, it feels a little hot. Clearly, some inappropriate scenes had crossed her mind. Lynn. And those girls. Lynn noticed her reaction, a trace of surprise flashing in his eyes. It was the first time he had seen Megami like this. Without missing the chance, Lynn pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of Megami's expression. Precious image, acquired. Megami froze, then looked up at Lynn, eyes filled with confusion. Lynn smiled faintly. You were so cute just now, I couldn't help but take a picture. Hearing that, Megami's cheeks flushed even redder, and she puffed up her lips subconsciously. But she didn't ask him to delete the photo. Instead, she turned her head away, avoiding Lynn's gaze. Seeing this, Lynn couldn't help but chuckle softly. Then he asked, So, Megami, do you still want to join my harem? Harem? Megami sighed. You really don't need to say it so directly. In her heart, Lynn was special. From childhood until now, Lynn was the only person who never ignored her presence and even remembered her name. If she were to spend the rest of her life with a boy, Megami hoped that person would be Lynn. Though he might be a little distracted. But she could take her time. She could try to accept it slowly. After all, the other beautiful girls in the Supernatural Investigation Club seemed to have accepted it. By the way, Lynn reminded casually, if you join my peerage, you'll be reincarnated as a devil. Hi. Megami was startled. A devil? She stared at Lynn, hesitating slightly. You mean, a devil like you? Lynn nodded. Megami blinked. It doesn't feel any different from being human. Or rather. She leaned in a bit, curiosity shining in her eyes. Is this appearance of yours just a disguise? Lynn looked speechless. This is my real face. Megami nodded thoughtfully. So, devils aren't exactly like the legends describe. A devil? What would that feel like? There was a faint spark of anticipation in Megami's eyes. Seeing this, Lynn said, if you've made up your mind, come to the Supernatural Investigation Club after school. Okay. Megami nodded. I understand. Speaking of which, would becoming a devil solve her problem? Megami couldn't help but wonder. Her issue with being easily overlooked, it might even affect her future as a peerage member. It was something that still troubled her deeply. She worried that, one day, the entire world might forget her existence. This was also why Megami cared so much about Lynn, the one person who had noticed her and remembered her name. Crash! Suddenly, the door of the classroom opened. Natsuki Minamiya stepped up to the podium, followed by a beautiful girl with long, straight black hair and amber-colored eyes. Seeing Natsuki, the students in Class 2, Year 1 had mixed feelings. Who would have thought? The petite, seemingly cute Minamiya-sensei was actually someone with supernatural abilities. Shuchen truly was full of hidden talents. Come to think of it. Could Minamiya-sensei be teaching a supernatural course? I really want to learn. With that thought, many of the students stared at Natsuki with eager anticipation. At that moment, even the beautiful girl standing behind her failed to attract much attention. Natsuki frowned slightly at their reactions. What's wrong with these kids? She cleared her throat lightly and said, this is our new transfer student. After a brief introduction, Natsuki turned toward Himeragi Yukina and said flatly, go ahead and introduce yourself. Himeragi Yukina stepped forward, glancing around the classroom. Her gaze paused briefly on Lynn before she spoke, Himeragi Yukina. Hearing this, Lynn narrowed his eyes slightly. Yesterday it was Kirasaka Sayaka, and today it was Himeragi Yukina. No surprises there. From the look in her eyes, he could already tell. This girl was here for him. The Lion King organization, huh? What were they thinking? Trying to use the same surveillance methods they used on the fourth progenitor? Lynn's lips curled faintly. Spying on him? The Lion King organization really had some nerve. Up on the podium, Natsuki sighed when she saw Yukina only state her name and then stop. That's it. Yukina looked at her, confused. Natsuki pressed her hand to her forehead and said, you should at least tell us your interests, hobbies, dreams, things like that. It'll help you fit in faster. Oh. Yukina nodded in realization, then paused, lost in thought. Interests and hobbies. Would killing devils count? But, looking at the ordinary students in the room, she figured that probably wasn't the best thing to say. Dreams. Yukina felt a little unsure. Well, a goal should be fine, right? Her current goal, of course, was to rescue Sayaka from the devil's clutches. Thinking of that, Yukina's gaze naturally drifted toward Lynn. But she couldn't just blurt out her mission details. She wasn't that foolish. Frowning slightly, Yukina looked troubled. Ah. That's right. Suddenly, her eyes lit up as she remembered her master's instructions before she left. If she could find a way into the Supernatural Investigation Club, her mission would be halfway complete. Good. That would be her approach. Yukina clenched her fists tightly, determination flashing in her eyes. My dream is to join the Supernatural Investigation Club of Shuchen. Natsuki. Whole class. The Supernatural Investigation Club. Isn't that Lynn's harem club? The students exchanged glances, their expressions filled with mixed emotions. Megami blinked, feeling a bit of admiration for Yukina's straightforwardness. Lynn's eyes narrowed slightly. This girl. What exactly are you planning? Huh? Yukina noticed the strange looks from the students and felt a bit confused. Did she say something wrong? Yukina-san, are you sure you know what the Supernatural Investigation Club actually is? Natsuki's tone was a bit complicated. Yukina hesitated. Isn't it a club that investigates supernatural phenomena? Natsuki sighed and said, you can look into it later. Ah, yes. Yukina suddenly felt uneasy. Did she accidentally say something she shouldn't have? Next, Natsuki arranged a seat for Yukina. The rest of the day passed quickly, and by afternoon, Yukina remembered Natsuki's words and carefully researched the Supernatural Investigation Club. When she found out the truth, her face turned bright red. The harem club. Yukina began to stutter slightly. So, what she had publicly declared during the day was basically announcing her dream to join Lynn's harem. Ugh! Yukina suddenly felt lightheaded. No wonder. No wonder the classmates had looked at her so strangely. Society, this is the end of society. A woman who openly declares she wants to join a harem would definitely be branded as shameless, right? Yukina blushed deeply, biting her lip. Master, explain this to me. Yukari had only told her to join the Supernatural Investigation Club. The mission would be halfway done if she succeeded. But she never mentioned anything about it being Lynn's harem club. If she had known that, she would never have said it so openly in front of everyone. Ha! Yukina's chest rose and fell, breathing hard, her emotions running high. There was even a moment when she wanted to take out her phone and give Yukari a very friendly call. Luckily, she held herself back. Hey, is that her? The new transfer student? They say her dream is to join Lynn's harem, right? Suddenly, she overheard whispers nearby, and Yukina froze. As expected. She had just arrived at school, and her reputation had already spread like wildfire. Yukina became visibly uneasy, her fingers gripping the straps of her backpack tightly as she lowered her head, not daring to look toward the source of the voices. Surely, they were laughing at her, right? For saying something so shameless. Oh, so it's her. What a bold move. I'm not even qualified to be part of Lynn's harem, so why does a newcomer think she has a chance? Huh? Yukina's eyes froze when she heard the conversation. Wait, what? This wasn't quite what she expected. The focus of the discussion wasn't on her shameless declaration. Instead, they were questioning whether she was even worthy to join the harem. Yukina stood there in a daze. Hey, let's give it another shot today. I will definitely become part of Lynn's harem. Hearing this, Yukina subconsciously looked up and saw three flashy-looking girls walking confidently in one direction. Almost like she was being pulled along, Yukina found herself following after them. Shuchin Academy, old school building. The student council had acted quickly. Especially after Lynn saved Shuchin and revealed his overwhelming power, the student council became particularly attentive, assigning the entire old school building as the activity space for the Supernatural Investigation Club. Just like Rias at Kua Academy, Lynn now had his own dedicated old school building for his peerage activities. But Lynn did not care much about this arrangement. After all, after taking control of the Shinomiya family's assets, the entire Shuchin campus practically belonged to him anyway. Inside the Supernatural Investigation Club, Lynn sat in his seat, feeling a headache coming on. Natsuki Minamiya was right. Indeed, many girls had come running because of the club's reputation. But wasn't this number a little too much? Looking around at the sea of girls filling the entire old building, Lynn felt dizzy. Yuta, holding the registration book, asked in a somewhat complicated tone, are these women really that desperate? Mahiru, carefully watching AI's tea-making skills while learning from her, commented softly, I think most of them are probably just here out of curiosity. Yuako leaned against Lynn's back, rubbing against him as she chuckled, Master is handsome and powerful. It's only natural for so many people to be interested. Lynn leaned his head back, resting it on the soft cushion behind him. Yuako, understanding his intent, placed her hands on his temples and began massaging gently. Enjoying the moment, Lynn gave instructions. Yuta, I'll leave the screening process to you. Yuta responded weakly, yeah. At the very back of the long line, Yukina looked at the massive crowd packed into the old school building, which felt more like a concubine selection event than anything else, and stood there wide-eyed. All of these? Are they really here to join the harem club? Yukina was stunned. There was definitely something wrong with this school. But when would it be her turn? Staring at the endless line of people, Yukina's eyelids twitched uncontrollably. She muttered to herself with a complicated expression, do I really have to join Lynn's harem? Hi. A surprised female voice suddenly called out to her. Aren't you here for that too? Yukina was startled. She hadn't expected anyone to talk to her. Turning her head, she saw a girl with long blonde hair, dressed fashionably and exuding a confident, guru-like aura. The girl looked at Yukina curiously and asked again, aren't you here to join Lord Lin's harem? Of course not. Yukina almost blurted out a denial. But she swallowed the words back. Her mission was to join Lin's harem. Remembering that, Yukina replied awkwardly, me too. Bang! The blonde girl suddenly grabbed Yukina's hand, her eyes sparkling as she exclaimed excitedly, then we're sisters from now on. Yukina. She froze. Sister? Sister? What is wrong with this woman? By the way, my name is Kitagawa Marin. My hobby is cosplay. Marin introduced herself cheerfully, blinking at Yukina as if waiting for her to respond. Yukina pursed her lips and replied weakly, Hi Miragi Yukina. Marin's eyes lit up as she recognized the name. Ah. So you're the transfer student who made that bold declaration. Hee. Yukina felt numb at this point. It seemed that her words from earlier had nailed her firmly onto the pillar of shame. Watching Marin's bright and expectant expression, Yukina couldn't help but ask, Marin-san, why do you want to join the Supernatural Investigation Club? Marin smiled confidently. Because I want to become part of Lord Lin's harem. Yukina. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Just because of that? Marin nodded firmly, clenching her fists. Exactly. She was determined to join Lin's harem. That back view she had seen of him that day had been engraved in her heart. Every night, she dreamt of Lord Lin. Just thinking about it. Marin subconsciously squeezed her thighs together as a blush rose on her face. Those dreams were definitely not suitable for children. Seeing Marin's reaction, Yukina felt even more confused. What kind of woman would willingly share a man with others? And from her own investigation, Lin's harem probably already had double digits of members. Yukina started to feel suspicious. Was Lin even able to handle this many women? Well, if he was the Mu, then maybe it was possible. The Supernatural Investigation Club's screening process was fast. Most of the girls didn't meet the qualifications to join. Although no one really knew what the qualifications were supposed to be. Some girls were rejected after just a few seconds of Yutao's cold stare, and many felt indignant. As the number of applicants decreased, Yukina and Marin's turn grew closer. Unqualified. Unqualified. Yutao's cold voice echoed repeatedly throughout the room. Watching the rejected girls leave one after another, Marin grew visibly uneasy, clenching her hands tightly. She didn't know. Would she even be qualified to join Lord Lin's harem? Yukina, too, was feeling conflicted. Soon, she would become someone else's harem member. If not for Sayaka, would she really have fallen this far? But for the sake of her friend. Yukina clenched her fists, determination shining in her eyes. After watching carefully for a while, Yukina also realized why her master had told her to join the Supernatural Investigation Club. She noticed the aura around Yutao and the others at the front. Without exception, they were all devils. The Supernatural Investigation Club was clearly Lin's peerage base at the academy. The so-called qualifications for joining were actually about screening potential peerage members. Taking a deep breath, Yukina tried to calm her nerves. For Sayaka's sake, she had to succeed. Finally, it was Yukina and Marin's turn. Yutao looked at them expressionlessly, but in reality, she was observing the reaction of the evil pieces within their bodies. After seeing the evil pieces glow faintly, Yutao nodded. You two, go in. Marin and Yukina stood frozen. Wait, we passed? We're qualified? Shuchin Academy. Old school building. Himuragi Yukina and Kitagawa Marin had successfully joined the Supernatural Investigation Club. With a soft click, the door of the club room closed behind them. Yukina felt a bit nervous as she cautiously looked around. This was nothing like a typical club activity room. There were no standard desks or chairs. In fact, it did not look like a place that belonged inside a school at all. It felt more like the luxurious lounge of a wealthy estate. At a glance, you could tell the leather sofa was high-end. A refrigerator, coffee machine, and other appliances were neatly arranged. Deeper inside the Supernatural Investigation Club's space, there was even a staircase leading downward. Clearly, what they were seeing was only one level of the club. Yukina continued to observe discreetly, clicking her tongue in amazement. She had heard that the entire old school building was allocated to the Supernatural Investigation Club. Shuchin really was generous. But this alone only surprised her a little. What truly caught her attention were the vortex-like patterns on the left wall. A space gate? The markings indicated, Zombie World, Black Bullet World, Demon Slayer World, and Soul Reaper's World. What is this? Yukina felt a wave of curiosity. It gave her a sense that this was no ordinary existence. Worlds? She could not understand. Even though the word world was clearly written, she could not fully comprehend its meaning. It was impossible for her to imagine that behind those vortex gates were actual alternate worlds. For now, Yukina pushed aside her curiosity and turned her focus toward the members inside the Supernatural Investigation Club. There were not many present, most wearing Shuchen Academy uniforms. They looked like regular students. This was slightly different from the intel she had received. But Yukina also understood that these might not be all of the members of the club. She didn't personally know any of them. However, every single one of them had appeared in the information given to her by her master. There was Yuta outside screening applicants, and Mahiru standing nearby. Without exception, they were all beautiful girls. And incredibly strong. Yukina subconsciously tightened her grip on her shoulder bag, her body tense. Through her spiritual senses, she could clearly feel it. Whether it was Yuta with the white headband outside, or the girls standing before her now, all of them were stronger than her. How was this possible? The intel clearly stated that before becoming Lynn's peerage members, they had all been ordinary girls. Something was off. Very off. Anyone investigating this situation would find it suspicious. Even Yukari had shown a strange expression when handing her the mission report. Perhaps Yukari had also noticed the unusual level of strength among Lynn's peerage members. After all, Yukina, as a sword shaman personally raised and trained by the Lion King organization, was still weaker than these girls who had only recently joined Lynn's peerage. Maybe this was also part of the Lion King organization's consideration when they decided to send her here. Yukina's thoughts were spinning. Meanwhile, Marin was not thinking nearly as seriously. When she first entered the club room, she had been a little dazed. After all, so many people had been rejected outside. She never expected that she would be so lucky. Now, she was standing in front of Lord Lynn. Marin's heart began to race. From the moment she entered the Supernatural Investigation Club, her eyes had not moved from the man sitting on the sofa. Lord Lynn, so handsome. Marin couldn't help but recall the scene from that day. When the massive wave was about to swallow her whole, Lord Lynn had suddenly appeared before her, raising a single hand. With ease, Lynn had dispersed the raging waters. Like the hero of a manga. And she was the damsel saved by the hero. Since then, Marin's mind had been filled with thoughts of Lynn. Maybe she was just a side character in this story, or even just a background extra. But she wanted to be the heroine. Even if this was a harem story, she still wanted to be one of the heroines. Marin clenched her fists, cheering herself on internally. She had to seize this opportunity. She didn't want to be just another passerby. So, this was her chance. With eyes shining like stars, Marin stared directly at Lynn and declared clearly, "Lord Lynn, please allow me to become part of your harem." Marin boldly launched her offensive. Hearing this, Mahiru and the others paused, then looked at Marin in surprise. This girl was unexpectedly forward. But Mahiru and the others were already used to hearing this kind of thing, so they were only slightly surprised before going back to their tasks. Marin's declaration caused no stir among the other girls. However, it left Yukina, who stood beside her, completely stunned. Is it really that direct? The corners of Yukina's mouth twitched. She couldn't understand how Marin could say something like that so easily. Still, Marin's words successfully redirected Yukina's attention away from the vortex gates and toward the man sitting on the sofa. Lynn, the leader of the Supernatural Investigation Club. The Mo who was active in the human world. And the devil who had captured Kirasaka Sayaka. Just thinking of this made Yukina quickly lower her gaze, afraid that Lynn might notice something suspicious. What she didn't know was that Lynn had already seen through her the moment she walked in. Though he still didn't fully understand the Lion King organization's motives. But it didn't matter. In the face of absolute power, schemes and plots were meaningless. Lynn continued enjoying Yuako's massage as he gave a casual order. "Mahiru, give them the entry manuals." "Yes." Mahiru responded softly, then took out 2 manuals from the drawer beside her and handed them to Yukina and Marin. She briefly explained, "These contain the rules and benefits of joining the Supernatural Investigation Club. Please read them carefully before making your decision." This was something Lynn had prepared the night before. The manual clearly listed the costs and benefits of joining the club. In simple terms, joining the Supernatural Investigation Club meant becoming one of Lynn's peerage members. In other words, part of the harem. Though Lynn would never force anyone, the outcome was inevitable. After joining, one must be prepared to devote everything to Lynn. Additionally, joining Lynn's peerage meant being reincarnated as a devil. While their original bloodline would remain, they would also inherit devil blood. The manual also briefly introduced the blessings system and the concept of traveling to other worlds. After being promoted to a transcendent, Lynn's approach had become more open. At this stage, He no longer needed to hide the perks he offered to attract peerage members. Holding the manuals, Marin and Yukina both looked a bit overwhelmed. They exchanged glances, then quietly began reading through the contents. Of course, both of them already knew about the harem situation. Neither objected. In fact, this was precisely why they were here. The only difference was that one came willingly, and the other was forced. Devil. Marin's eyes flashed with excitement when she saw the word. Her peach-colored contacts glimmered as she glanced up at Lynn. Could it be, that such a handsome Lord Lynn was a devil? And all these beautiful girls in the Supernatural Investigation Club. Marin couldn't help but start wondering. It felt completely different from the terrifying devil imagery told in legends. But even so, Marin's heart raced wildly. A devil. She never thought she would have the chance to get so close to such an existence. Even better. She might actually have the chance to become one of them. Yukina, on the other hand, showed little reaction at the mention of devils. That was not what surprised her. What truly caught her attention was the next section. The blessings system. When she read those words, Yukina's eyes froze. A blessings system that unlocks potential, allowing one's strength to grow infinitely through training and combat? Yukina subconsciously tightened her grip on the manual and raised her eyes to Lynn. This kind of thing. Could it really be true? Although it felt a little unbelievable, Yukina could not help but feel shaken as she looked at Mahiru and the others. Could this be the real reason why their strength had increased so rapidly? Gulp. Yukina swallowed hard, feeling a wave of unease in her heart. It seemed like she had stumbled upon an incredible secret. But was something this important really written so casually in the Supernatural Investigation Club's entry manual? Yukina tightened her grip on the manual, her fingertips turning pale as her heart began racing uncontrollably. At some point, a fine layer of sweat had formed on her smooth forehead. Her throat felt parched. Unlike the carefree Marin beside her, Yukina's thoughts were a complete mess. She had only come here with the simple goal of rescuing Kurosaka Sayaka. Once the mission was complete, she would need to find a way to leave Lynn's peerage. But as Yukina lowered her head, staring at the contents of the manual, her pupils trembled slightly. Her amber eyes looked as if they were about to cry. Agility, I0. Endurance, I0. Magic, I0. Innate abilities. Phantom Devil. Illusion Silk, can instantly analyze the form and temperament of two-dimensional characters and perfectly replicate their appearance and abilities through weaving illusion silk. Duration increases with level. Infinite Wardrobe, linked to the kaleidoscope dimension, storing data of analyzed characters' illusion costumes, which can be summoned at any time to generate armed replicas. Devil Transformation, Kaleidoscope of Magic. Lynn stroked his chin, reading over Marin's blessings message. If he remembered correctly. Didn't Marin love cosplay? This ability really suited her perfectly. Yukina also glanced at the blessings message on Marin's back but could not fully understand its meaning. Lynn casually copied down Marin's blessings information without saying a word. A phantom devil, hi. Marin's eyes sparkled with excitement as she read her blessings message. She was so absorbed that she didn't even bother putting her clothes back on. This was the perfect ability for her. Illusion Silk. Infinite Wardrobe. She had always worried about not knowing how to sew properly. But now, with the power of illusion silk, that problem was completely solved. Just thinking about it made Marin's eyes light up. Driven by curiosity, Marin focused her mind. Illusion silk. Buzz. In the next instant, Marin felt herself drawn into a separate dimension. This is. She looked around curiously. It resembled a massive, empty wardrobe. It was clearly linked to her other ability. Infinite Wardrobe. Realization dawned on Marin. But what should she do next? Just as she was wondering, strands of shimmering, colorful silk emerged from the wardrobe space. At the same time, information about the skill flooded into her mind. A few seconds later, Marin's eyes lit up. So that's how it works. I need to input the character's data first. Her gaze full of excitement, Marin clenched her fists. All right. I've decided. It'll be you. Back in the real world. Marin's eyes remained closed as she focused. Suddenly, a flash of light surrounded her. Buzz. Marin's figure shifted and transformed. Her long blonde hair darkened into a deep purple, and a set of elegant gothic Lolita clothing materialized, covering her body. Marin opened her eyes, delighted with her transformation. It's the real Shizuku-chan. Shuchin, old school building. Supernatural Investigation Club. Marin turned around happily, spinning lightly with a bright smile on her face. Great! Now I can cosplay all my favorite characters as much as I want. And the accuracy is insanely high. Marin's peach-colored eyes sparkled with excitement. Originally, she had come here just to become Lynn's bride, but this unexpected bonus. It was truly wonderful. Off to the side. Himuragi Yukina watched Marin, who was completely immersed in excitement, the corner of her mouth twitching slightly. Was that really necessary? Yukina didn't quite understand. Her gaze wasn't on Marin but on the blessings message in her own hands. She had already begun to comprehend the content copied by Lynn. The information looked just like a player panel from a game. There were levels, basic stats, and skills. Staring at these details, Yukina's eyes became a little dazed. So this was a cheat-like system that unlocked one's potential? Yes, it was real. The moment the blessings message appeared, and after Marin awakened her skill Phantom Devil, Yukina was convinced of the blessings system's authenticity. At that moment, warm breath suddenly brushed past Yukina's ear. She flinched instinctively and quickly turned her head to the left. Smack! Her eyes widened in shock as her lips pressed directly against Lynn's cheek. Yukina's pupils trembled violently as her whole body froze. Feeling the soft sensation on his face, Lynn raised an eyebrow and smiled. So eager already? Ah! Yukina stumbled backward, covering her mouth in panic. Her cheeks burned bright red. Hi! Marin blinked, glancing at Yukina in surprise and whispering, she looks so innocent, but turns out she's pretty bold. Agility, I0. Endurance, I0. Magic, I0. Innate abilities. Protection of psychic vision, passively detects magic flow, hostility, and traps within range. Extremely resistant to invisibility and illusion-based abilities. Spiritual blood regeneration consumes magic to accelerate healing and purify curses or toxins. 8 Thunder Magic, a close-quarters combat technique named after the 8 Thunder Gods. Godhead Vibration, when wielding the mechanical demon-purging assault spear Mark 7, attacks gain magic-breaking and defense-shattering effects. Can disintegrate magic barriers and enhance physical strikes. Divine Vibration Wave Drive, nullifies magic, disrupts barriers, highly effective against vampires. Air, Foe Angel Mode, accumulate sufficient spirit to evolve toward angel form. Demon Slayer. Eye of Divine Punishment, passively senses the flow of magic and malice within a 300-meter radius. Can mark up to 3 targets, revealing their magic-breaking weak points. Demon Breaking Barrier, deploys a barrier formed by 8 spear blades, reducing the effectiveness of all magic within range by 70%. Divine Vibration Critical Breakthrough, activates the divine core resonance of the Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer, causing attacks to gain spatial vibration effects. Anti-Demon Attack. Devil Transformation, God's Punishment Heavenly Prison Spear summons the phantom of a giant snow wolf to execute a penetrating strike, collapsing the god core of all targets within a straight line. Development Ability. Magic, C. Lynn raised his eyebrows slightly, a flash of surprise appearing in his eyes. He hadn't expected that Himuragi Yukina, who had just been reincarnated as a mid-class devil, would possess such an extensive skill set. All he could say was, as expected from someone trained by a professional institution. Unlike him, who in the beginning could only rely on pure, brute force magic release. And her potential seemed quite promising. What surprised him even more was the fact that the mechanical demon-purging assault spear Mark 7 strapped to Yukina's back was not categorized as a treasure. Lynn rubbed his chin thoughtfully, some guesses surfacing in his mind. Perhaps it was because Yukina had never truly held sovereignty over the weapon? The Lion King organization was probably still unwilling to entrust such an important weapon to an inexperienced apprentice shrine maiden. However, Demon Slayer. The ability clearly stated it granted sovereignty over the mechanical demon-purging assault spear Mark 7. Seeing this, Lynn let out a soft chuckle. Whether the Lion King organization liked it or not, the weapon now belonged to Yukina. Lynn continued reading through the details of Demon Slayer, and his expression grew a little strange. Despite the Demon Slayer title, aside from the special attack effect against devils, the rest of the abilities seemed to have little to do with actual demon slaying. What caught his attention the most was the God Core Collapse effect mentioned under Devil Transformation. There was a faint connection to divine power within that ability, and Lynn couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't something simple. Setting aside the discomfort of that divine association for now, Lynn copied the blessings information from Yukina's status and handed it over to her. Receiving the message of favor, Yukina lowered her eyes and began reading carefully. Her gaze first stopped at the line that read Master, Lynn Valifor. For some reason, that single word, Master, weighed far heavier than she had imagined. A complicated expression crossed Yukina's face. Master. She sighed silently and continued reading. When her eyes fell upon the list of innate abilities, she couldn't hide her surprise. Was she, really this powerful? As she read on, Yukina gradually understood. It seemed like everything she had learned so far had been integrated into her innate skills. And beyond that, there was the added power of Demon Slayer. Sovereignty over the Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer? Yukina furrowed her brows slightly. The Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer had always been her weapon, hadn't it? She instinctively reached toward the shoulder bag beside her. But in that moment, she forgot the current state she was in. With a soft thud, her light blue bra fell loosely to the ground. Yukina's entire body stiffened, her outstretched hand frozen mid-air. Lin raised his eyebrows and, with a faint smile, his eyes naturally fell on the scene before him. Oh! That's surprisingly impressive. He let out a soft chuckle. Yukina's face flushed instantly. She quickly pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around her body in a panic. She was completely exposed. Wah! Yukina was screaming internally, her amber eyes shimmering with misty tears. From the side, Mahiru and the others couldn't help but whisper. Lin, why do we always seem to get these kinds of unexpected benefits? Yuako and the others nodded in agreement. Lin's lips curled slightly. He could only say that the luck brought by the soul of the Four Souls demon really was a man's ultimate skill. Yukina stood there frozen, her eyes vacant as if her soul had left her body. Amused by the sight, Lin leaned down and picked up her bra, waving it gently in front of her dazed face. Yukina's amber eyes slowly began to refocus, instinctively following the movement of the garment, swaying left and right. Lin watched with great interest, as if he were teasing a cat. The Lion King organization really had sent him quite the amusing talent. After a moment, Lin raised the corner of his mouth. Not planning to take it back. Yukina's consciousness snapped back fully at his words. Her face flushed even deeper, and her pupils trembled violently as she stared at the bra in Lin's hand. She reflexively reached out. But halfway through, she froze again. That was still in Lin's hand. Seeing her hesitation, Lin chuckled lightly. Go ahead, take it. Yukina exhaled slowly, then carefully reached out and took the garment back from him. Lowering her head, she quickly began to get dressed. However, she couldn't help but peek up at Lin, who still showed no intention of turning away. Her hands gripped the fabric a little tighter. But he had already seen everything anyway. With that thought, Yukina gritted her teeth and decisively finished dressing, moving faster than she ever had in her life. A few seconds later, with her clothes back on, Yukina finally felt a little more secure. Nearby, Marin squatted down beside her, smiling brightly. Yukina-san, you were so cute just now. She hadn't expected that the serious-looking Yukina could show such a range of expressions in such a short time. A perfect talent for roleplay. Cute. Yukina's lips twitched. Cute? She had nearly died of embarrassment. Suppressing her frustration, Yukina bit her lip and glanced resentfully at Lin. Well, it's all my master's fault. And Sayaka's too. Why did you have to provoke this move? More importantly, why am I the one left to clean up the mess? It wasn't until this moment that Yukina truly realized just how impulsively she had acted. In her desperation to save Sayaka, she had allowed herself to be pushed into this situation far too easily. But now that she thought about it, wasn't this something the higher UPS of the Lion King organization should have handled themselves? Why send her, just an apprentice shrine maiden? I'm weak, helpless, and innocent. Yukina screamed in her heart. Little did she know. The upper management of the Lion King organization didn't dare to offend Lin directly. This underhanded approach was the best they could muster. Yukina stewed silently, inwardly vowing to march straight back to the Lion King organization tonight and demand an explanation. In the meantime, she shifted her focus back to the Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer, trying to push the embarrassing memories from earlier out of her mind. Squatting down, she opened her bag and pulled out the weapon. With a sharp clink, a silver spear came into view. Seeing Yukina draw out the spear, Mahiru and the others paused for a moment, exchanging surprised glances. Clearly, these new arrivals were no ordinary girls. Hi. Marin blinked curiously. Yukina-san, are you into cosplay too? For a second, Yukina wasn't sure how to respond. Forget it. She decided not to explain and just let Marin think whatever she wanted. Reaching out, Yukina placed her hand on the snow wolf. This time, though, the feeling was clearly different. Before, the Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer had simply been her assigned weapon. But now, she could sense the faint connection between herself and the weapon strengthening, as if the gap that once existed between them had vanished. She remembered asking her master about this issue before. But back then, her master had only smiled cryptically and given no clear answer. However, the effect of Demon Slayer had confirmed it for her, granting true sovereignty over the mechanical demon purging assault spear Mark 7. So, had the weapon never really belonged to her until now? With that thought in mind, Yukina gently placed her hand on the Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer once more. Buzz! The moment her fingers made contact, the Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer vibrated sharply. In the next instant, the spear floated into the air, moving away from her. It flew straight into Lin's hand. Bang! Lin casually caught the Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer in one hand. Yukina stood there frozen. She could only stare blankly, completely dumbfounded by what had just happened. Shuchen, Old School Building. Supernatural Investigation Club. Yukina froze in place, then stiffly turned her head to look at the Snowdrift Wolf Schneewalzer, which was now held firmly in Lin's hand. What happened to the so-called sovereignty over the mechanical demon purging assault spear Mark 7? How did it suddenly end up in someone else's hands? Lynn casually weighed the Snowdrift Wolf in his palm, his eyes showing a trace of curiosity. This spear, clearly isn't as simple as it appears on the surface. More importantly, he hadn't even moved, yet the Snowdrift Wolf had flown into his hand on its own. Does it have a will of its own? Lynn narrowed his eyes slightly, channeling magic power into the weapon. Buzz. In an instant, the divine vibration wave drive technique engraved into the gun's frame activated. Wisps of white mist swirled around it, the gun body trembling faintly and releasing soft bursts of sound, as if it were joyful. Himuragi Yukina's eyes widened in disbelief. The Snowdrift Wolf. It was responding so eagerly to someone else. And why did it seem even happier than when she used it herself? The Snowdrift Wolf had never shown this kind of reaction to her before. Yukina pursed her lips tightly, her expression clearly unhappy. Lynn narrowed his eyes, gazing at the softly humming Snowdrift Wolf, and muttered, "It's still not enough." There was still more power sealed deep within this weapon, waiting to be uncovered. Following his instincts, Lynn continued pouring magic into it. The next moment, buzz! The Snowdrift Wolf's trembling suddenly stopped. A radiant, multicolored stream of light burst forth from its barrel. Lin's eyes flashed as a wave of information poured into his mind. Return the world to its origin. Lin murmured to himself, a gleam of understanding flickering in his eyes. So this was the Snowdrift Wolf's true power. The so-called return the world to its origin. To put it simply, it erased any existence sustained by magic. In other words, a more bloodthirsty, aggressive version of the fantasy breaker. Lin smacked his lips in thought. Could the Lion King organization, merely a human organization, really create something like this? If humans were truly capable of developing such a weapon, they would have stood atop the supernatural world long ago. However, from the information transmitted by the Snowdrift Wolf, Lin also learned that the core of this mechanical demon-purging assault spear Mark 7 wasn't originally human-made. Its true origin was a relic of the former Heavenly Department. The demon-breaking Holy Spear, one of the 3 great Holy Spears. This was the true source of its ability to return the world to its origin. The Lion King organization had merely managed to develop the divine vibration wave drive technique on the surface. They had no idea that the weapon's true power had been sealed away beneath that outer layer. But Lin could hardly blame them. Without the ability to unlock such power, how could they possibly know? Lin rubbed his chin thoughtfully. In this anime world where multiple universes had fused together, perhaps there were some deviations in the origin and history of these celestial artifacts. It seemed like there were still plenty of mysteries in this world worth exploring. Moreover, Lin opened his personal panel. Under the Devil's Summoning section, the invasion progress of the main world had increased again. Especially after Yukina had officially joined his peerage. Was it because of her ties to the Strike the Blood universe? Lin had a few vague guesses forming in his mind. If he wanted to fully complete the invasion of the main world, he might need to interact with every connected world view. But Lin wasn't in a hurry. He turned his focus back to the Snowdrift Wolf, planning to test out its return the world to its origin ability. Mahiru, fire at me. Hi. Mahiru was momentarily stunned but quickly recovered. Without questioning further, she drew out the blazing spear she had received from Rias, charging it with light element magic. Bang! A glowing projectile shot forward. Lin raised the Snowdrift Wolf, not using any defensive skills or abilities. He simply pointed the gun barrel directly at the incoming light bullet. Buzz! The Snowdrift Wolf flashed, and the magic-infused bullet vanished in an instant, erased as if it had never existed. Yukina stood frozen, her face full of confusion. What just happened? Mahiru blinked in surprise, then narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. It looks like, the magic I just released was completely erased. It felt like, wiping something off a painting with an eraser. Lin put away the Snowdrift Wolf and gave a simple explanation of the weapon's true capabilities. Return the world to its origin, hi. Mahiru's eyes widened slightly in awe. She hadn't expected the weapon to hide such terrifying power. Yukina's mind was spinning. Return the world to its origin? She had been using the Snowdrift Wolf all this time, yet she had never known it possessed such an ability. As she stood there still in shock, Lin casually tossed the Snowdrift Wolf back to her. Reflexively, Yukina caught the weapon. The moment it touched her hands, the radiant glow of the Snowdrift Wolf immediately faded, returning to its dormant state. Yukina stared at the now quiet weapon. She couldn't help but feel that the Snowdrift Wolf was silently expressing its disappointment. It didn't like her? Suppressing that thought for the moment, Yukina raised her head, looking at Lin with obvious confusion. Wasn't the Snowdrift Wolf better suited for him? Why give it back? But Lin offered no explanation. Indeed, the Snowdrift Wolf was a good fit for him. However, Lin wasn't about to start snatching weapons from his own peerage members. Besides, even though Yukina held the spear physically, through the connection he now shared with the Snowdrift Wolf, Lin could summon it to his side at any moment if he wished. Compared to Yukina, his control over the Snowdrift Wolf was absolute. Lin leaned down slightly, gently pinching Yukina's chin. His lips curled into a faint smile. Now then, it's time to talk about business. Yukina's cheeks turned slightly red from the warmth of his hand, her amber eyes filled with confusion. Business? Just as she was about to ask, Lin's calm voice rang out. You were sent here by the Lion King organization, weren't you? Yukina's entire body shuddered violently. She froze, like a statue. He knew. Since when? From the very beginning, Lin replied with a smile, as if reading her thoughts. Panic flashed across Yukina's eyes. If he knew all along, then why did he still allow her to join his peerage? Why hadn't he stopped her? Seeing the confusion and fear in her eyes, Lin chuckled softly. Why wouldn't I accept a peerage member who delivers herself right to my door? Yukina. Her lips pressed into a thin line as a shadow fell over her eyes. It was over. Not only was Sayaka in trouble, now, she herself was trapped too. Yukina fell into silence, her heart weighed down by dread. Was he going to torture her next? Seal her powers? Imprison her? Don't tell me he plans to. But just as those thoughts began swirling in her mind, Lin reached out, placing his hand gently atop Yukina's head. She froze again, body tense, hands clenched, not daring to move a muscle. Several seconds passed. Finally, Lin spoke again. I don't care who you worked for before. From the moment you became my peerage member, your life belongs to me. With that, Lin turned away without saying more. He looked toward Mahiru and instructed calmly, Mahiru, take them to get familiar with the peerage. Yes, Master Lin. Yukina was stunned. That was it? No interrogation? No imprisonment, torture, or threats? Nothing? She couldn't help but feel a bit dazed. Wasn't this different from what she had expected? Mahiru crouched down beside her with a smile. All right, newbies. Let's start with an adventure to another world, shall we? It was a tradition for new peerage members. They would first participate in monster subjugation, learning how to level up and master their newly acquired abilities. A short while later, Yukina, along with Marin, followed Mahiru through the dimensional gate, leaving the Supernatural Investigation Club. Lin silently watched their figures disappear into the portal, his eyes narrowing slightly. The Lion King organization. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Their exact intentions remained unclear. But honestly, the Lion King organization had been very generous. In just a short time, they had sent him 2 valuable talents. One was Himuragi Yukina, now a part of his peerage. The other was Kurosaka Sayaka, currently still tied up at his manor. Lin tapped his finger against the armrest. Would they send even more? Back at the Lion King organization. Yukari sneezed suddenly, muttering softly to herself. Someone must be talking about me. Was it Yukina? Thinking of that, Yukari's expression became slightly complicated. I wonder how Yukina is doing over there. Just as she was about to dwell on the thought further, Shirin Okariki's voice echoed in the room. Someone from the domain is here. Emergency meeting, now. Yukari sighed helplessly, standing up. The domain. Her eyes darkened slightly. Could it be? Is this about that matter? It seemed that more trouble was on the horizon. Shichin. Old school building. Supernatural Investigation Club. Yuta looked at the deserted old school building and breathed a sigh of relief. She muttered, these women are seriously insane. But, thankfully, it was finally over. Standing in front of Yuta, Megami looked a bit troubled. What should she do? She seemed lost. Yuta stretched, then turned around and pushed open the door of the Supernatural Investigation Club. Bang! She closed the door without any hesitation. Megami. She reached out but finally sighed helplessly. Inside the Supernatural Investigation Club. Seeing Yuta walk in, Lin raised his eyebrow and asked, all done? Yuta walked over to the refrigerator, took out a bottle of soda, and drank it in big gulps. Ha! Letting out a satisfied sound, Yuta said, they've all been sent away. A hint of doubt flashed across Lin's eyes. Did Megami not come? Never mind. He didn't think much of it for now and turned his gaze to the portal. The matters in the main world were almost settled. Next up. It was time to invade the world of the Soul Reapers. Thinking of this, Lin started gathering troops in the group. Maiko, Midoriko, Kikyo. He temporarily selected members with soul-related abilities to form the advance party. Before long, everyone Lin had summoned arrived at the club. Kikyo blinked and looked at Lin expectantly. Master Lin, are we going to a new world to spread the faith? Lin glanced at Kikyo, who had become a fanatical missionary, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. But in the Demon Slayer, Kikyo had performed excellently. So, Lin didn't discourage her enthusiasm, instead smiling and saying, "That's right. I see." Receiving Lin's affirmation, Kikyo clenched her fists, her face filled with determination. The red and white shrine maiden outfit she wore seemed to shimmer faintly with the light of faith. As the shrine maiden of Master Lin, her life's mission was to spread his name across the worlds. Midoriko glanced at Kikyo, who seemed to be glowing, and her eyelids twitched. She wanted to say, since they were all shrine maidens, could she tone it down a bit? But seeing Kikyo's fanatical expression, she couldn't bring herself to say anything. Maiko stood silently nearby. Ever since she advanced to a higher class devil, she had been secretly looking forward to this day. Because Lin had once said that this world was very suitable for her growth, Maiko decided she would perform well this time. Preferably, she could earn a reward from her master. Thinking of that, her face flushed slightly. But thinking of her mother's persistent teachings, she took a few deep breaths and her gaze became firm. There were many members in Lin's peerage. She needed to find a chance to stand out. This time was her opportunity. Lin observed his peerage calmly, nodding imperceptibly. Midoriko and Kikyo were both seasoned veterans. Although they didn't have much experience invading worlds, they didn't panic in the face of the unknown. In contrast, the newer members, who had been ordinary people before, even after experiencing several worlds, still needed time to adjust. But so far, they had adapted well. Lin lightly coughed, drawing everyone's attention, and then began explaining the details of the world of the Soul Reapers. Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, the real world. Shinigami, Hollows, Quincy. As well as the technology level, equipment, and power system. Lin explained everything thoroughly to Maiko and the others. Just to be safe, and to avoid incomplete information from anime, Lin used Devil Summoning to contact Yoryuki Shihaorin, asking her to compile more detailed data and send it over. Soon after, when they received the compiled data, Maiko and the others spaced out slightly, trying to digest the sudden flood of information. Demon Arts? On the side, Yuta, who had been listening, showed a bit of interest. The abilities recorded in her Devil Tome were still too few. Seeing this, Lin said, "Don't worry. When we get there, I'll ask Yoryuki and Kisukura Hara to make a copy for you." Having two former captains was like having two walking treasure troves of knowledge. Not using them would be wasteful. Upon hearing this, Yuta's red eyes lit up immediately, and she kissed Lin on the cheek. "Master's the best." Lin smiled without much reaction. After this little interlude, Maiko and the others regained their focus. Midoriko sighed, "No wonder Master says it's the perfect world to nurture Maiko. Just those endless hollows would be enough to fill Maiko's appetite, right?" Maiko looked a little excited too. Kikyo pondered for a moment before saying, "The power system in this world is already quite complete. Demon Arts of the Shinigami, Zanpakuto, Quincy's spiritual weaponry. Each profession had its corresponding system. It'll probably be hard to conquer such a world, right?" Lin knocked on the table, smiled faintly, and said, "Don't worry. We have plenty of time." He clapped his hands and continued, "The goals of our peerage remain the same. First, monster resources. This went without saying. If the members of his peerage wanted to grow stronger, monster resources were essential. Moreover, the world of the dead could be developed into a sustainable dungeon world. Unlike the zombie world, Black Bullet world, or Demon Slayer world, which were destroyed after cleaning them out. Once monsters were wiped out, they were truly gone." Hearing Lin's explanation, Maiko and the others nodded seriously. They also understood how important monster resources were. If they wanted to level up, they had to rely on them. Second, Lin continued, the various abilities and equipment in that world. For example, the Zanpakuto. Lin looked at the group, who had pitifully little equipment, and couldn't help twitching at the corners of his mouth. Our peerage is in urgent need of weapons, and Zanpakuto can solve that. Such a large group without a decent weapon among them. Thinking of it gave Lin a headache. Fortunately, with the existence of the world of the dead, this problem could be resolved sooner rather than later. Lastly, there was the matter of increasing their influence. This was the key to conquering the world. Lin stroked his chin, already having a plan in mind. The world of the Soul Reapers. Including Hell, there were 4 major realms in total. If they could master all 4, their influence would naturally grow. Or rather, that was Lin's original plan. Devour the Soul King. Of course. There was still one more important matter. Yuta crossed her arms, pouted, and said, "Recruiting followers, right?" Lin looked at her approvingly and said, "As expected of you, Yuta. You understand me best." Yuta rolled her eyes but said nothing. Recruiting more members had always been part of the peerage's main policy. Besides, more girls meant more fun. Although she still felt a little jealous inside, Yuta had long gotten used to it. As long as she had her place beside Lynn, she was satisfied. After further discussion, Lynn made the final decision. Alright, it's settled. Next stop, the world of the Soul Reapers. As soon as his voice fell, inside the Supernatural Investigation Club, the portal engraved with the character for death began to shine brightly. At the same time, in the world of the Soul Reapers, Yoryuki suddenly felt her chest heat up. She quickly pulled out the devil's summoning document. There, she saw Lin's complicated expression. He said speechlessly, "You keep stuffing me into your clothes." Yoryuki laughed awkwardly, "This way I feel like you're closer to my heart." Lin curled his lips. This woman never spoke seriously. How's the reorganization of the station going? Hearing that, Yoryuki's heart sank. The moment she had been dreading had finally come. She hesitated for a while, then forced a smile, "It's almost done." With Urahara Kisuk's Zanpakuto abilities, changing the layout wasn't difficult. Good. Lin nodded, and the devil's summoning document flew out of Yoryuki's hands into the air. The next moment, a portal resembling a black vortex stood quietly. Step. Under Yoryuki's gaze, a foot stepped forward. Soon after, Lin's figure appeared before her. He looked at Yoryuki with a smile he thought was kind. "Oh, we meet again." Yoryuki forced a smile as she looked at Lin. She really didn't want to meet Lin again. But what was meant to come would come eventually. Lin didn't care about Yoryuki's expression. He glanced around the surrounding environment and nodded in satisfaction. This wasn't the same space as the one he had previously visited, but it was equipped with all the necessary facilities. It could temporarily serve as a base for the peerage. Good. Lin patted Yoryuki's shoulder, giving her an approving look. "I can see you put effort into this." Yoryuki squeezed out a smile. "As long as you're satisfied." She stared at Lin and sighed helplessly. During this time, Yoryuki had lived in constant anxiety. Even when she managed to sleep soundly, she would wake up periodically to check the devil's summoning document. She had even thought about escaping to a remote place to hide. But that devil's summoning document was like a parasite. No matter what she tried, she couldn't shake it off. There was no choice. Yoryuki could only obediently wait for Lin's judgment. She blinked at him, trying her best to look clever. Seeing this, Lin raised his hand and patted her head like petting a cat. Yoryuki's body stiffened immediately. After rewarding her with a head pat, Maiko and the others peeked out from the portal. "This new world doesn't seem all that special," Maiko muttered to herself, then stepped through. The moment Maiko entered, she spotted Yoryuki's stiff figure. Her expression turned strange. The Spirit Seer Devil ability reacted. And it was the same reaction she had when facing Yuako. Could it be? Was this person a ghost? Or perhaps, a Shinigami, like Master mentioned before? Yoryuki felt the gaze on her and looked over with her golden eyes. Soon, she saw a black-haired girl with golden pupils. The moment Yoryuki laid eyes on Maiko, her entire body trembled. Her heart suddenly tightened. What was that? There was shock in Yoryuki's eyes. She was trembling just from looking at this girl? It felt like her instincts were afraid. Why? Yoryuki narrowed her eyes and carefully studied Maiko. From the surface, there was nothing particularly special. She even looked quite ordinary. There was no spiritual pressure either. But Yoryuki didn't dare to underestimate her. After all, Lin, who also had no spiritual pressure, had easily subdued her with a single blow. A woman who could stay close to Lin was definitely not ordinary. Maiko and Yoryuki stared at each other, creating a strange tension in the air. Lin noticed Yoryuki's bristling hair and became thoughtful. It seemed Maiko's Spirit Seer Devil ability affected her. So, Maiko did have a natural advantage against beings like Shinigami and Hollows. As for why Yoryuki didn't react the same way to Lin, it was simply because Lin had complete control over his abilities. Unless he chose to activate them, they wouldn't trigger any reaction. After a while, Kikyo, Midoriko and the others also stepped through the portal. When Yoryuki saw Kikyo, her body trembled again. This woman gave her the same oppressive feeling as Maiko. Yoryuki instinctively took a step back. Her expression grew stiff. Were all these people unfriendly toward her? Soon after, the portal closed. Yoryuki secretly observed the group of women behaving so intimately with Lin. These women, could they all be Lin's? Thinking back to her previous experiences, Yoryuki suddenly felt a bit fortunate. After a short time, Kisuk rushed over after receiving the news. The first thing he noticed was the only man among the group of women. That must be Lin? Kisuk lowered the brim of his hat, trying to suppress his presence. This was his first time meeting Lynn. But the previous silent confrontation had left a deep impression. It had only been a simple barrier. Yet it had completely surpassed anything he had seen before. Even if he activated his Bankai, he wouldn't be able to break it. From that moment, Kisuk knew. This man was not someone he could oppose. In fact, Kisuk felt that Lin was far more terrifying than Aizen Sosuke. At least, when facing Aizen, he wouldn't have felt so utterly powerless. Who exactly was this man summoned through the devil's summoning? Moreover, he couldn't sense any spiritual pressure at all. Thinking of this, Kisuk narrowed his eyes. In this world, whether it be Shinigami, Hollows, Quincy, or Fullbringers, spiritual pressure was the fundamental energy. Yet here was someone with no spiritual pressure, but whose strength was so overwhelming. It shattered his understanding of the world. Kisuk let out a quiet sigh. Surely hundreds of years of research couldn't be wrong? He couldn't help but question his own research direction. Fortunately, Kisuk was not one to dwell on internal conflict. He quickly suppressed these doubts. His gaze swept over the others. The moment he saw Maiko and Kikyo, he froze. A chill surged from the bottom of his heart. It felt like encountering a natural predator. What was wrong with these two women? Kisuk's heart shook violently. Coincidentally, Lin looked over at him. Kisuk quickly lowered his head respectfully. Nice to meet you. In front of overwhelming strength, Kisuk abandoned his usual casual demeanor. Lin nodded calmly. You should know the way to Hueco Mundo. Hueco Mundo? Kisuk was slightly surprised. Why would he want to go there? Although puzzled, Kisuk didn't hesitate. I have a realm-fixing device that can open a Garganta to Hueco Mundo. Then go prepare it. Lin's tone was casual. Just like how they had taken over this place without notifying Kisuk. Lin didn't particularly care about Kisuk. He only had two choices, surrender or die. But Kisuk was indeed a useful talent. Lin stroked his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. He needed to squeeze out every bit of value from Kisuk. Suddenly, Kisuk shivered and looked up, puzzled. He had the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Not finding anything unusual, Kisuk exchanged a glance with Yoryuki, then quickly left. Reality was harsh, and strength ruled everything. Since Lin wanted to go to Hueco Mundo, Kisuk naturally had to prepare the realm-fixing device. As for the idea of resisting, he never even considered it. Yoryuki couldn't last a single exchange. Thinking about fighting was just asking for death. Of course, Kisuk was still a bit curious about why Lin wanted to go to Hueco Mundo. Not to mention, there was a dangerous individual tied to Hueco Mundo. Kisuk couldn't help but worry. If those two met, would it cause an unimaginable disaster? Meanwhile, when Yoryuki received Kisuk's gaze, the corner of her mouth twitched. She understood what he meant. But he didn't dare to mess with Lin, so why should she? That bastard Kisuk. Yoryuki cursed him silently, then forced a stiff smile and cautiously asked, what do you plan to do in Hueco Mundo? She had no choice. Naturally, Yoryuki also knew what Kisuk knew. Aizen Sosuke. Involving someone like that, she had to find out no matter what. Lin lowered his eyes and looked at Yoryuki's cautious appearance with some amusement. Then he raised his hand, and a black magic circle appeared in front of him. The next moment, Lin pulled out a black leather manual. He casually tossed it to Yoryuki and said calmly, "You'll understand once you read it. To be continued."